After Christian died, the girl hit up a church for one last prayer, hoping her wish would actually come true. He was literally her only reason for living, but now he was gone, and it felt like her whole world had just been swept away. Walking barefoot on the creaky wooden path, all she felt was this crushing despair, and the hopelessness was making her so weak. So weak that her leg just gave out and she totally collapsed. The pain of losing her guy was just overwhelming. But Christian didn't just die, he was murdered, and she had a pretty good idea who was behind it. She was seriously doubting if there was even a god out there, or if Christian was just fated to die all alone like that. She had no clue what her purpose was anymore, but she was ready to trade her life for his. With her last sliver of hope, she begged God to save her love and take her instead. Then one day something wild happened and this girl got rebooted with a whole new identity, and now her name was Hillary. At first she thought she'd just passed out reading a book and woke up as one of the characters. But this character wasn't even mentioned in the romance novel she was reading. When she checked out the mirror, she saw her reflection. She was looking at this drop-dead, gorgeous woman. Turns out Hillary was a simple girl with no family, but for some random reason she was also seriously loaded. In one of the rooms, she found a crazy amount of treasure. We're talking gold and precious gems everywhere. Usually characters like that pop up in novels to save someone or totally flip the script on the main plot. But now the girl had no idea why she ended up as a character, or what to even do with all this insane cash. But then she got an idea she could basically become a superfan of her favorite character. She'd buy herself a title and crash a ball. The dude she went to thought she was nuts until he saw a pouch literally overflowing with gold coins. Psyched about the unexpected payday, the guy handed Hillary a paper that officially made her a noble. After buying her way into the upper class, the girl got all glammed up in a gorgeous outfit and headed for the ball. That's where she was gonna meet the main character, the one with hair that had this pearly iridescent glow. And her eyes were this color of ocean waves. Just being near that girl felt like breathing in pure sunlight. Prince John was there too, rocking that perfect combo of golden eyes and dark hair. He was the kind of guy that totally fed into every girl's thing for dark-haired dudes. Hillary could barely believe it. That she could now see her faves up close and personal. There was also going to be another character at the ball, a heartless type who sometimes made ruthless calls to get what he wanted. But he was also the sweetest guy ever, and his whole connection with the main girl was super limited. His fate was tragic in the end. She totally shot him down, leaving him with a one-sided crush. Hillary was convinced you'd never find a guy that hot and intense anywhere else. He was her absolute fave, and she'd just dropped a fortune just for a chance to see these characters IRL at the ball. When the three of them were together, they looked like a masterpiece, just totally unreal. But Hillary didn't dare go up and say hi, 'cause they had this main character aura she couldn't touch. Being reborn as a side character, she just couldn't break into their circle. Still, the world kept spinning even with her there, and she wanted to make a positive impact on it. Julia had this divine healing power and always looked out for the underdog. They called her the only ray of light in an empire overgrown with greed and deception. So Prince John, the guy who was supposed to be her future husband, and his best friend Marquis Cristian were both totally sprung on her. John was always in her corner, treating every single one of her moves and decisions like they were golden. Meanwhile, Cristian swore he'd never ditch her and would be by her side through thick and thin. But then you had the villains of the story. Like Duke Oliver and his daughter Caroline, who were seriously powerful. The Duke's daughter was desperate to marry the prince and become empress, so she hit Julia with some kind of sickness, and basically blackmailed the prince into getting engaged to her. If he didn't want Julia to die, John couldn't let that go down, so he bailed on his true love and got into a marriage he totally didn't want. In the end, Cristian decided to get payback for his friend and the girl he loved by forcing the Duke and his daughter to drink some poisoned tea. The Marquis thought they'd go back to living their best lives, but Julia found out what he did and was completely wrecked. The girl didn't want to hear a single apology from him and told him to never show his face to her again. But Cristian just couldn't wrap his head around why the girl he loved was so hurt. I mean, he was just trying to save his friends. But after that whole incident, Julia distanced herself from him for good and completely ghosted him. A little while later, she married Prince John, and their massive wedding was celebrated all over the Imperia. By then, a whole year had already passed. And ever since Hillary got yeeted into this story, she'd just been waiting for the finale, hoping she could finally bounce back to her own world. After all, Julia and John seemed crazy happy together. She also hoped that her boy Cristian was happy somewhere out of the spotlight. She wanted that smart, handsome guy to not get hung up on a love that wasn't going anywhere, and to just keep on living. Still, Hillary wanted to see him at least one last time before she left, but he never showed. So she decided it was time to go back, leaving the guy she loved behind. All she could do was pray for him. But a year later, she found him again, and he looked nothing like the character described in the story. Now he looked thin and sickly. Cristian appeared in front of Hillary like a ghost, and she realized the guy was on the brink of death. 1 year ago, when she woke up, Hillary figured that once she returned to reality, she could only dream of living a comfortable life. But at least she could see her family and friends, even though she knew no one would believe such a wild adventure. Hillary knew this story was over, but she would still miss her favorite characters. After looking around, she finally realized she wasn't being sent back to her original world. The girl thought it was just a fluke, and that everything would work out the next time she woke up. But then one day passed. Then two, then a week, and then several months, and Hillary was still in this world she'd landed in. She waited one more year. But she couldn't get out of this book no matter how much she wanted to. She even gave away all her wealth to charity, and was now living in a mountain cabin. Hillary was scared of having to live in this world without family, friends, or even a single acquaintance. The future, something she had no control over, terrified her. But the news in the newspaper terrified her even more. About more failed attempts by Marquis Cristian to end his own life. He lost the will to live after his best friend and the woman he loved left him. For that entire year after the book's official ending, he tried to take his own life. But he always failed. Hillary got the feeling that someone was always stopping him and saving him, though. She hoped he would change his mind and live happily, and she kept praying for it. She also prayed that when she woke up again, she'd see her familiar ceiling and feel the book in her hands. But it never happened, and it felt to Hillary like this reality was just messing with her. She was so confused, like why was this even happening to her? She couldn't go back, couldn't even peep Christian's happy life, and started thinking if this was going to be her forever, maybe she should just peace out for good. So she wandered deep into the woods trying to get totally lost when suddenly she heard footsteps coming her way. When she looked up, boom, it was Cristian, and dude looked like he was going through it like real bad. For a sec, Hillary was sure she was dreaming because she'd totally given up on ever seeing him again. But then Cristian just turned all quiet and was about to bounce, so she yelled his name, not about to lose him again. He actually answered, and it hit her that this was for real, not a dream, which was a major relief. Then from the other side of the clearing, they heard voices like a search party yelling for the missing Marquis. Cristian instantly pulled her into a hug. He slapped a hand over her mouth, and she was internally screaming like she couldn't believe she was this close to him. After they waited for a minute and the coast was clear, the Marquis dropped his hand. Hillary could finally talk and realized people were hunting for this guy, so she offered to help. Figuring something major went down, she invited him back to her place, which was kinda a mess since she lived alone and literally never had anyone over. Cristian was like, my bad for all the drama, but she was totally cool with it. Hillary was still bugging out that this wasn't a dream and that Cristian, the guy she could never get close to, was now sitting right across from her, alive and breathing. She was curious about what went down with him in the woods. She didn't press him for an answer, though. The dude just wanted to fade out of existence, and seeing this girl living all alone in the forest, he got that she had her own story. Hillary admitted she felt the same way, stuck and unable to get back to her friend's family and her whole world. She used to think it would all be okay, but it had been so long that her hope of ever going back had completely burned out. Listening to his new friend's story, Cristian realized they both wanted the same thing, just with like one small difference. His best friend and the person he loved both bailed on him, and now he can't go back to his old life. That's why he came out to the woods. He thought just ending it would be better than living like that, but he couldn't bring himself to do it, even though everything sucked right now. Deep down, Cristian didn't want to die, and he decided that in this whole mess, this girl Hillary was way stronger than he was. She just stared at him, finding it hard to believe her hero, this guy who had it all, was so broken. She could also tell he was totally exhausted. Her first thought was to get him some food. Even looking so wrecked, he still seemed to glow to her because she was crushing on him hard. Man, she missed seeing him like that, missed that whole vibe. Then Hillary told him to hang tight for a sec, promising she'd be right back. And suddenly she thought it all clicked, like she finally understood why she was stuck in this story in the first place. For a whole year, she had felt like it was her destiny to meet Cristian. So now she was on a mission, buying the best fruit for him at the closest shop. Hillary knew she had to bring him back from the edge, so she started with a hot meal and tucked him in under a warm blanket. She also really wanted to just talk with him for a while and was hoping that even if they weren't the main characters of this story, they could at least look out for each other. But when Hillary got back home, she walked into a total nightmare. Cristian was on the floor, and next to him was a bloody knife. The girl was shaking with fear. She couldn't process that she'd lost the guy she loved right after she'd finally found him. She'd just seen that spark of life coming back to him, and had hoped they could be happy. At least he now understood the real reason she was even in this world. But she just couldn't get why she had to go through this horror. Hillary clutched the lifeless body of her love, not understanding why he'd ever do something like that. Then she spotted a note on the table where Cristian said he was sorry for staining her home with his blood, and promised to make it up to her. The very next day, Cristian's death was the top story in all the papers. But only for a single day. People forgot about his death real quick since the front pages of the papers were plastered with the scandal between Julia and John. And Larry just couldn't believe something like that could happen, because they seemed so happy. And just like that, their beautiful love, which had lasted for more than 2 years, was snuffed out in an instant. Hilary's life became totally empty after Cristian's death, and she was just so angry because now she had zero hope left. She didn't have the strength to take care of her health or even her own soul anymore. So in a state of pure desperation with no hope at all, she headed for the church, just shoving past people without even realizing it. Some folks got annoyed with her, but the ones who already knew her knew she was just completely wrecked by the grief. They'd watch Hillary come to the temple every single day and just drift around aimlessly, hoping she would finally talk to the saint. However, the saint hadn't shown up at the temple, ever since she became the prince's wife, and now she couldn't be bothered with common folk. Meanwhile, Hillary couldn't stop thinking about Cristian, who had always been the entire meaning of her life. But now that he was gone, this world just ceased to exist for her, and she wanted to leave it all behind any way she could. Even though the Marquis died by his own hand, the girl knew that he was actually murdered. Hillary was positive it was his friends who bailed on him and betrayed him, and that's what really killed him. Now the girl was just praying for her wish to come true, that she could give her life in exchange for his. Weighed down by grief and hatred, Hillary lifted her head and screamed it at the whole temple. Suddenly she felt like she was lying on something soft. And then she saw a ceiling that looked super familiar. The girl glanced around and realized she was in the bedroom where she used to live, from before she moved to the mountain. But she distinctly remembered being at the temple, and figured one of the saints must have brought her here. Then all of a sudden she noticed that nothing hurt, and she felt amazing. Even her headache had vanished, like she'd returned to her original body, the one she had from the very start. Hillary wondered what on earth it could all mean, and she decided to peek out the window to figure out what was going on. When she did, she saw the street below, where a parade was happening to announce the wedding of Julia and John. On that day for their wedding celebration, a massive festival was thrown so that everyone could celebrate their happiness. Hillary realized that somehow, she had gone back in time right to the wedding day of the story's main characters, but she couldn't understand why it happened. And at first she figured it wasn't worth stressing about. Then she remembered that this was also the day the Marquis Cristian would try to take his own life for the first time. The young woman got ready in a flash, found a coachman, and immediately demanded that he takes her to the Marquis. Hillary was sure she was being given another chance, but now she had no intention of reconciling Julia and Cristian. She remembered clearly that while John was burning with a fiery passion for Julia, the Marquis was giving her all his attention. And yet that girl never thanked him for anything, just acting like she was entitled to it. Harley rolled up to the Marquis's crib, dead set on making sure his love for Julia didn't just go up in smoke. But at the front door, the guards totally blocked her, and the girl had to spill that she had a super important message for Cristian. But they were still gatekeeping, so she decided to fake him out and screamed that St. Julia was literally right behind them. While they were bugging out trying to process it, Harley slipped past them like a shadow and bolted for her target. The girl knew some real bad stuff was about to go down. It was happening on the second floor, so she immediately sprinted up there, shoving past the staff, because she also needed Julia to get it. To understand everything the Marquis had done for her, and how messed up her accusations were. Busting into the room, Harley screamed at the Marquis, who already had a blade to his own throat. That stopped him cold, and he decided to find out who dared to just barge in and wreck his vibe. Harley totally got what he was about to do, but now she had no clue how to explain her sudden appearance. More than anything, though, she just wished Julia would regret shattering the Marquis' heart. Then she pounced on Cristian, snatched the knife, and tackled him to the floor. While he was trying to figure out what the heck was happening, Hillary already knew she'd do anything for her heartbroken BAE. Standing before him with her hand on her heart, she said she wanted to become Cristian's Marquis. William, the butler who'd looked after Cristian since the previous Marquis, was totally shook by what he was seeing. He'd always believed that his master, despite the rejection, would bounce back from the L and get his old swagger back. Now he was seeing total chaos in his room, the master about to off himself and some girl suddenly storming in. Then that same girl proposed to him, leaving the butler's brain completely fried. Only Hillary was feeling good about it, since she managed to stop the Marquis from checking out. She couldn't let him die according to the script, so she decided to flip the narrative a bit. Her train of thought got derailed when an intrigued Cristian asked her why she wanted to marry him. Hillary tried to make it clear that wasn't what she meant, but she noticed the Marquis had laughed. She figured he was just feeling out of it in that moment, but he let her run with what she wanted. The girl was caught off guard by the sudden response and knew this wouldn't be so simple. Even though Cristian was hurting, he accepted. But this was way more than a simple request. It was a whole marriage. She wanted to talk more with him, but the Marquis told her to hash out the details with the butler. Then Cristian said he needed to rest and ordered them both out of his room. Hillary was trying to process what just happened, and William simply called for the guards to stand watch over the Marquis' peace. A little later, she went to the butler's office and gave him her name and title. William decided to hit the girl with some more salty questions. But she didn't even flinch, because according to the novel's plot, this dude was the rudest character, and she was already prepped to hear him out. The butler kicked things off by pointing out that Hillary had stormed the Marquis's place on her own damn whim, completely blowing past security. On top of that, she busted into his room and knocked him over, causing Cristian to fall and get hurt. Still, William understood that without her, the Marquis wouldn't be alive, and for that, he was grateful. In the original version where Hillary didn't exist, this man had tried way harder to stop the Marquis's death. She understood that Cristian didn't die in his own house, so now she had to be thankful to the butler. But William kept going, saying that from the doorway, the young woman tried to pass a message to the Marquis. Then she booked it straight to his room as if she knew Cristian was about to kick the bucket at any second. But Hillary was like totally stumped on how to explain it. She knew if she spilled the tea about being a time traveler, the butler would just clown on her. But then she remembered, like, this is basically a novel, so she could totally claim to have some sick supernatural powers. Besides, she'd already crashed into Christian's life, so she wasn't some random NPC anymore. She was a main character, at least to the butler. Hillary just hit him with the "I can see the future" line, saying that's why she rushed to help the Marquis. Judging by William's vibe, the girl could tell he wasn't buying it, so she decided to drop some receipts. Pulling a memory out of nowhere, she told him about the pink diamond that the Marquis had asked the butler to give to St. Julia as a present. But my dude never actually followed through, and now that diamond is just chilling in the third drawer of the Marquis's desk in his study. Literally only Cristian and William knew that, so the girl figured that was enough to prove she was legit. The butler was shook, and Hillary kept going, saying the Marquis was going to keep making reckless moves in the future. Now she felt like she had to use her powers to save his life, but added that she needed to stay close to stop him from trying to unalive himself again. And for that she needed some real clout. That was like the only reason she was even thinking about becoming the Marquis. The girl also promised to sign a whole prenup thing, swearing she'd never try to own the place, and that she would never ever hurt the Marquis. The butler heard her out, but like it wasn't his call to make. He basically told her to take it up with the Marquis. The next day, Hillary was stoked she'd won over the butler and was about to dip, but William was like, "Yo, it's way too late to go home," and offered her the guest room. Once she was finally alone, Hillary felt totally wiped, but she'd come so far. Now she had to game plan her next move. I mean, her whole mission was to save the Marquis Cristian. At that same moment, he couldn't sleep, just replaying the whole crazy night in his head, wondering what to do. He started mentally praying to Julia, like asking for a sign on how to handle all this. Before crashing, Hillary was just processing how she totally didn't see any of this coming, and then all of a sudden, she saw a tiny angel and a little devil pop up on her shoulders. She figured they were the ones who gassed her up to make such a wild move. They were insisting that deep down, she really wanted to be the Marquis's wife, and that this was a major glow-up moment for her. But like, you can't unring that bell, and the girl was stuck in this romance plot now. Still, she tried to convince herself that at first she wasn't trying to marry the guy, just be his secretary. The little devil, though, was adamant, like he totally heard Hillary say she wanted to marry Cristian. Cause when she saw him at death's door, she realized being a secretary just wasn't gonna cut it. That's why she had to act like she was some kind of psychic to get a shot at saving the Marquis. That was her one and only goal for real. And then the angel and devil were like, "I bet we'll help." Then she heard them say they were always with her, but she was so confused, cause she couldn't see anyone there. She opened her eyes and realized it was morning, and the whole thing was a dream. That dream was kinda trippy though, and she wondered what it was even supposed to mean. A little later, the butler came by and asked her how she slept. She thanked him, saying the bed was super comfy. Then William noticed the girl was totally on edge, waiting to hear back from the Marquis, which totally threw him, since she could supposedly see the future. Hillary asked how Cristian was doing, and found out he was way more chill today. The butler was like again wondering how Hillary could see the future, but not this. The girl explained she could only see the big significant events, not so much the tiny details. William apologized for his lame joke, but Hillary was not feeling that kind of humor. Then the butler spilled that the Marquis had hit him up for something the night before, and he'd pulled an all-nighter prepping documents without any sleep. Hillary felt kinda bad for him. William gave her the green light to check out the documents and go to the Marquis, but he told her to be careful with her words. She promised everything would be cool, and asked him to bring some fruit punch and brandy later. After that, the butler announced her at Cristian's room, and the girl braced herself for a super important chat. When she walked in, the Marquis was sitting on his bed looking a little rough around the edges. Hillary was all set for the meeting, but the second she saw the look in his eyes, she was instantly thrown back to that tragic event. Still, she kept her cool and gave the Marquis a polite hello, but he was completely silent. The girl held her breath, and then the butler came over with 2 stacks of documents. He asked her to read them carefully so they could talk them over, and handed her the pile of papers. According to the docs, Hillary saw that she'd get all the perks of the Marchioness title. Plus, just like in any marriage, she was entitled to Marquis Cristian's property. But the girl didn't need or want her future husband's property or cash. I mean, she wasn't some gold digger. The butler respected Hillary's wishes and promised to scrap that part of the contract. William wanted to clear something else up with the Marquis, but then he saw he was already signing the papers. The butler was totally shook. He hadn't even read or edited them for real. But Cristian didn't care as long as they stopped bugging him. Not knowing what else to say, William didn't try to argue, and Hillary saw that stormy look on his face again. Even so, she decided to walk up to him and promise he'd never regret it. She even tilted her head and gave him a sweet smile, hoping it would lighten his dark vibe a little. But right then, Cristian wasn't in the mood to listen to anyone, not even her, and asked the young woman to just leave him alone. She and the butler bounced from his room, and after that, Hillary got ready to head to the temple. William didn't really get her plan. He wanted to know why she had to go there right now. But the girl wasn't about to just sit around. She wanted to give something back to the Marquis. Hillary had been cooking up some plans all night and morning, and she decided to start with Julia. This girl, even though she had divine power, was a commoner, so her position at the temple was kinda sketchy. Cristian donated the most fertile land to the temple for her, which helped her lock down a solid position. Then Julia became the crown prince's wife and was totally living her best life. This whole plot twist made Hillary low-key sad, because Julia never even bothered to thank the Marquis for his gifts. She couldn't just let that slide. So when she got to the temple, she planned on reminding that girl about everything the Marquis had done for her. Hillary was so mad she practically cursed her. She wished Julia's neck would hurt from all the presents she got from Cristian. As soon as Hillary hopped out of the carriage and was about to go inside, a monk stopped her. He saw the Marquis's carriage rolling up and totally bolted. Who was totally breathless, ready to say what's up, but then he saw her and just froze. He was shook and she was like, "Yeah, I'm subbing in for him today." Then Hillary dropped the bomb that she was the Marquis's wife, which totally blew the monk's mind. He didn't buy it and told her she needed a better story. 'Cause like everyone knows, the Marquis is still hung up on Julia. And while that dude was trying to process how Hillary even rolled up in the carriage, she was already on to the next thing. The girl had zero time for a phony like him and wanted to talk to the head honcho. The monk tried to clap back but got instantly clocked in the face with a little pouch of gold that Hillary yeeted at him to make him shut up. Then she demanded to see the high priest, and the robed dude was like, "Bet," and agreed to lead her to him and give her the grand tour. Inside, another guy in robes named Greg met her, but she could tell he wasn't the top dog either. The main dude was like always booked and not easy to catch, so Greg told her she'd have to go through him first. Greg wanted to fact-check if she was for real the Marquis's wife, but she got why he was so sus. She gave him the short version that they literally just tied the knot today and told him the priest could totally send someone to the Marquis to double-check. Hillary handed over the doc with Cristian's signature and seal, but Greg was still gonna verify it. She was not vibing with this dude from the get-go. He gave off majorly sketchy energy. As they kept talking, Hillary explained she was there about the Marquis's so-called donations, and now she wanted to take back the land that was gifted to the temple all thanks to Julia. That statement made the priest absolutely lose it. He literally yelled that Hillary couldn't ask for that. Greg insisted that she was about to stir up some major divine drama for trying to snatch what belongs to God. But she corrected his flow, saying the land was given to the prince's wife, who everyone thought was a saint, not to God himself. Now that said saint had bounced, Hillary figured the land was basically useless to them. The girl knew that greed had taken root and blinded these priests, and they just straight up kept Julia's property. Then, Greg asked her to hang on a sec, and Hillary could tell her words had hit the mark. If that hadn't worked, she would have had to start throwing shade on Julia's and the whole church's rep, and she was glad it hadn't come to that. Still, it was a low-key bummer she couldn't spill the tea on the real Ice Queen nature of their precious saint. While Hillary was zoning out, the bishop snuck up behind her, which she totally didn't see coming. He explained he'd gotten the full download. Plus, they'd checked out Marquis Cristian's signature and seal, and the docs were 100% legit. And now the head priest Thomas was just hoping his guys hadn't crossed any lines while dealing with her. Then he got down to business, asking why Hillary had come and wondering why she was so set on getting the land back. The girl repeated that she wanted her land, but Thomas was sure she was on a wild goose chase. He didn't want to bog her down with all the deets, but he made it crystal clear the temple couldn't just hand over the property. Thomas just clarified that the Marquis knew the land would never fully belong to Julia. The fact that the temple owned the turf now was a total downer for Hillary, but she wasn't about to back down that easy. The girl decided to threaten the head priest, telling him that by tomorrow, the papers would be flooded with some seriously scandalous headlines, like about the dark side of a saint the whole world was obsessed with, or about the villain who used the Marquis for clout. Thomas was not ready for that kind of heat, but Hillary was just getting started. She could totally tell from his face that the blackmail was landing. The head priest was shook, couldn't say a word, and knew he was seriously screwed. In a super tight spot. But then he tried to play dumb, acting like it was all just some crazy talk. Hillary, though, wasn't buying the whole church's selfless act for a second, and was so ready to wipe that fake smile right off Thomas's face, which he was using to hide how freaked out he was. Hillary dropped a headline idea: the prince's wife, the church's loyal lapdog. She also spilled the tea that Julia was totally two-faced, using her pure devotion as a front for her greed to snatch up some prime land. Hillary reminded him that the bourgeois aristocrats still couldn't figure out why the prince would ever choose a commoner like Julia as his wife. Sure, the people had her back, but a lot of the nobles still weren't feeling her. And if word got out that this so-called saint and the temple were in cahoots, the fallout would be insane. Thomas was floored by the threats, but Hillary wasn't a noble, so she couldn't care less. Plus, the girl warned that if the head priest didn't return, the land she'd snitch to the emperor immediately. She planned to expose how the temple was pocketing offerings and only looking out for itself. Thomas was visibly nervous, but was betting she had zero proof. Hillary, however, knew that if she went to the emperor, it would trigger a massive investigation into the temple, and they'd for sure dig up even more dirt. She also claimed she had receipts that would speed things up, so Thomas decided to go huddle with his men to figure out the best game plan. In reality, Hillary was bluffing, though she knew the temple wasn't as squeaky clean as it seemed. And something shady was bound to come out eventually. Based on his reaction, she knew she'd made the right call. After that, she suggested they handle everything quietly and on the down low. Getting close to the head priest, Hillary hinted that she knew exactly what was up, and he in turn clearly understood that he was fresh out of options. That evening, Hillary went back to her new crib and found the butler there totally freaking out. He didn't know why she'd been at the temple for so long and was starting to worry. But the girl assured him it was all good. Then she whipped out a document proving that the land formerly owned by the temple was now back under the Marquis's control. William couldn't believe that such a seemingly simple girl could have pulled off getting those lands back and was totally stoked. While she was telling the butler how the head priest just handed over the lands, Cristian was watching from the window. Hillary felt his eyes locked on her, but when she turned back, he was gone. William then advised that his lady should go directly to him to share this awesome news. She would have liked to, but she understood that Cristian still wasn't used to her being around. So she asked the butler to do it. He agreed and also told Hillary to get some rest, promising to send a maid to help her out. As she replayed how she totally owned the priest, she didn't even realize that a whole day had gone by. She was sure that with a start like this, her revenge would come soon, and decided to check on the land the next day. While thinking about her future plans, the girl didn't even notice she had passed out. Meanwhile, at the imperial palace, they had already told Don Juan that the Marquis had a wife, and he was planning to check it out for himself. The next day, Lady Hillary was in Cristian's office, and like he kicked off a whole convo about her moves. The girl started apologizing for acting without his say-so, but low-key she had no idea why this was all happening now. I mean, she'd planned on scoping out the land, and then out of nowhere the Marquis just summoned her. It was something he'd never done, like he'd never even looked her way before. Hillary's brain immediately jumped to him being salty about her giving back the land, and that he was about to kick her out. But Cristian's vibe was totally different, and then she saw he was looking right at her. The Marquis asked for her name, and the girl gave him the full scoop, including what family she was from. As he kept scanning the paper, Cristian confirmed she wasn't some blue blood from before. Then he got real curious about the real reason she wanted to marry him. The girl was shook. She totally didn't see that question coming, at least not right then, and she had to really think about her answer. Cristian even stopped reading and just stared hard at his wife. Then she just went off screaming that she deeply hated the prince and his wife. Hillary knew those weak excuses weren't going to work, so she moved on to her next play. She wanted those two to apologize to the Marquis, and also for him to stop thinking about, ending it all. The Marquis thought Julia and John were in her way, but she made it clear it wasn't about her. It was Cristian who was in danger, and right now all she wanted was for those two snakes to regret their shady decision. Before all this, the Marquis had met with the butler, who told him the girl could basically see the future. Cristian looked at him like he was crazy, and decided it was probably time for the old guy to retire if he was thinking stuff like that. But William spilled on how he found out about Hillary, that she already knew about the Marquis's attempt to unalive himself. He also said this girl knew the whole story behind the diamond, and she'd advised him to add a clause in the prenup saying she'd pass on any inheritance, however. William pointed out that Hillary had already given the lands back, and now he was dead sure she actually cared about the Marquis. Cristian remembered that for real she wasn't asking for the title or the money, and had returned the land all on her own. Now he understood she was doing it for him, but he couldn't get why since they'd literally never met before. The girl didn't know how to respond, because he'd never understand why a total stranger would be so invested. The Marquis was super curious if Hillary had another reason for choosing him, but he just couldn't see it. With no answer, the girl decided to go on the offensive, suggesting that if he didn't like her moves, she was totally down to sign the divorce papers and bounce from his house immediately. Hillary was feeling like a total third wheel, and if the Marquis wasn't cool with it, she'd just leave. Cristian hesitated for a second and then confessed that he'd gotten a letter from Prince John. He understood it was her business and that Hillary had to handle it solo, so he wasn't planning on getting involved, even though he was secretly interested in how it would all end. He let her do whatever she thought was necessary. Hillary felt a wave of relief and promised to come back after meeting with the Crown Prince, but she still needed confirmation that she wasn't a fraud, and Cristian promised to write a letter by hand. Hillary thanked her husband for being so understanding and helpful, and he let her go get ready. In the hallway, she ran into the butler, who was all nervous again, begging her not to think everything was his fault, but she wasn't even worried about that anymore. She promised him it was all good and told him she needed to go somewhere. When William found out his lady was going to visit the Crown Prince, instantly promised to get everything set, and right away the butler rounded up basically all the staff and told them to make things look absolutely flawless. The maids heard their new boss lady was also hosting Lady Julia, so they were all in vowing to make it totally on point. In no time at all, everything was set, and Hillary straight up didn't even recognize herself in the mirror. She was rocking the makeup and jewels so hard. Like she was cute before, but now a total smoke show, a legit stunner, and the staff was totally vibing with it. Still, Hillary was low-key confused why everyone was suddenly so obsessed with her. Now that she'd popped up as the Marchioness out of nowhere, the maids were hyping her up, telling her to serve the prince the same energy she served when she took back the Marquis's lands. Even though Julia was supposed to be the main character in this whole drama, Hillary was stoked that people were finally backing her, especially with her new glow-up. She geared up for the meet, ready to slay and not take any L's. But TBH, remembering how drop-dead gorgeous Lady Julia was, Hillary was a little shook she might get overshadowed. She rolled up to the palace soon after and gave a polite "what's up" to the prince and his wife. John was totally floored to see it was the Marquis's new wifey. And Julia was like, I swear we've met before. Hillary had a flashback to the first time she ever saw Julia, when she first got dropped into this world. Back then, that girl was rocking a simple but super chic look at the temple. Julia was out there mending people's wounds, flashing that smile. She was legit a saint to everyone back in the day, but now this hero is a whole different person. Hillary couldn't get how anyone could not be obsessed with someone like Julia, but these days, she only ever shows up at bougie spots. She leveled up to royalty, and now she's only ever seen with her hubby, the crown prince. So when she ran into her, Hillary played it cool, saying they probably had her mixed up with someone else. Next thing you know, they're sitting down for tea, and the Marchioness whips out the marriage certificate. She also slid the prince a handwritten letter from the Marquis. John immediately clocked his old buddy's handwriting. Then Julia was like, let me see that, so she checked it out real close, and realized the letter was no cap from Cristian. But she was bugging about how the Marquis could have gotten hitched so fast, cause he had literally just confessed his love for her. John totally backed up his wife on that, since Cristian wasn't the type to just jump into major life decisions. However, his letter and the marriage license were screaming otherwise. Plus, Hillary rolled up in the Marquis's ride, so the prince had no choice but to accept that his boy had actually married this pretty cool chick. Seeing their faces, Hillary could tell they were still sus, but that didn't change the fact she was the Marchioness. The prince was still giving her some serious side-eye, and he figured she was on a total power trip. He'd heard the tea about how she got Christian's lands back and even threatened the head priest. But for Hillary, it wasn't a threat, she was just spitting facts and got the results she wanted. The prince, though, considered that if an explanation sounded like a threat to someone, then it was a threat. The girl corrected him, saying it was less of a threat and more like, blackmail. By flexing her new position. Then Julia jumped in, claiming the temple doesn't even own private property, and that anything given to it belongs to the gods. Hillary then threw some shade, hinting that the princess had been using her divine powers exclusively for the royal family's benefit. The girl flashed back to a time when she escaped and ran to the temple sick, praying to meet the saint. But plot twist, Julia didn't have time for randos like her anymore, and Hillary almost died because she got ghosted. The second she became the prince's wife, Saint Julia was totally over helping out regular folks. In that totally tragic moment at the temple, Hillary realized the saint wasn't for the people anymore after the princess pulled that stunt. It was a safe bet her gift wasn't vibing with the divine will anymore. Julia was totally frozen with surprise. The whole situation was unexpected, and she had no clue how to clap back at the Marquis, but then the prince stepped in. He jumped in and told Hillary to watch her mouth because she was talking to his wife. The girl immediately apologized for her words. Then she hit the prince with a question, wanting to know if he seriously wanted Marquis Cristian to donate that land to the temple. John remembered that for real his friend had only donated that land to the saint because he was crushing on her. Hillary suspected the prince wanted her husband to stay tangled up in his old feelings for the princess. At that moment, neither John nor Julia had anything to say, and the Marquise knew they couldn't argue. But she needed Cristian to forget his past love for good. That meant he'd have to spill the tea on his past actions in front of everyone. So Hillary told them she wasn't pressed about her husband's past, because now he was going to have a better future. But low-key, the girl was plotting to wreck his future and get revenge on her beloved. John was getting the vibe that this girl had no manners or respect, and he couldn't figure out how she'd even ended up in the Marquise's life. But the way people get hitched is different for everyone, and it's not always about some passionate, crazy love. So the prince asked why Cristian had picked her when so many noble girls were chasing him. And that's when Hillary decided to reveal that just like the saint, she had a certain supernatural ability. The couple was all ears, but her answer was that she could see the future. And just as Hillary figured, Prince John wasn't buying it because he was always a skeptic about that stuff. However, the girl noticed that Julia was pretty shook to hear it, probably because she thought she was the only special one. Hillary decided to prove to the prince she wasn't capping and that she could tell him about the future. And John heard that they would soon capture a big-shot thief who was causing a mess in the imperial capital. When they got back home, Hillary gave the Marquis the rundown on her meeting, and he was especially curious about the future part. Cristian guessed she meant the thief who only stole jewelry at parties. The girl confirmed it, but also admitted that the prince didn't believe her. He was salty about it the whole time. Then the Marquis got curious about how Julia reacted. He found out she only asked for the land back, but Hillary had to spell out Cristian's real intentions for her from the moment he gifted her that land. In the end, the princess got the picture, at least that's what the Marquis hoped. But she also sensed some confusion from her husband and thought maybe he was still into her, even though Cristian had only gifted her that land way back when. And once he got it back, he couldn't care less about it. He then decided to thank his wife for what she did, but for her, just seeing his face every day was enough. Though she was totally living for the moment, he leaned in close, even wondering how exactly he planned to thank her. But then Cristian suddenly backed off. He asked what she wanted for her work and told her not to take forever to answer, but Hillary did it for him, no strings attached. Although she did need one thing. The girl thought for a second, and then asked the Marquis for permission to hire a tutor. Meanwhile, she was daydreaming about Cristian and couldn't forget that moment when he was so close to her. The whole wanting a tutor thing seemed kinda weird to the Marquis, but he was game and asked if she had anyone on her radar. Hillary straight up picked Mrs. Elizabeth, the lady from the salon. And Christopher was totally thrown, like, why asterisk her asterisk of all people? But Hillary was dead set on this woman and just couldn't vibe with why her husband was having such a fit. See, Mrs. Elizabeth was the aristocrat, with the most clout with Lady Julia, and Hillary had been scheming to get her on her side for a hot minute. Two ladies who were throwing shade at the princess got straight up taken out with some poison tea, which led to their permanent dirt nap. So the nobles totally switched up their vibe and weren't coming for Julia anymore, but a few of them were still salty about the whole thing. With the prince's wifey, and Hillary decided to use that to her advantage. Even though the Mrs. Elizabeth was always super sweet to the princess, the Marquise chose her for totally different reasons. That woman was a true fan of Julia's and would give her the real tea, telling her not to give up on her thing with John. She also gave the princess the whole rundown on court etiquette and pretty much became her spirit guide. Hillary knew there was no way that woman could just play dumb about the whole situation. On top of that, Hillary knew that Julia was about to make some major plays to get the nobility on her side real soon. That's why Hillary decided she had to lock down Mrs. Elizabeth's support before anyone else beat her to it. Cristian finally dropped all the questions and told his wife to just have William the Marquis take care of it. He was totally in the dark about Hillary's game plan, but he was still thankful for her. The young woman just gave her husband a simple thanks, and she was so relieved that Cristian was being chill. She wasn't just happy, she was so hyped she literally wanted to jump for joy. She kept a lid on it for now, though. But once she was back in her room, she could finally let it all out, letting her feelings loose and just jumping on the bed like a little kid. The girl knew all her grinding was finally paying off, and had a feeling things were on the up and up. The very next day, Hillary was the first one to tell the butler to get in touch with Mrs. Elizabeth. She knew the proper move was to invite her over, but Mrs. E asked the Marquise to come to her place instead. Hillary didn't want to seem stuck up to the lady, since just like Julia, she wasn't born with a silver spoon. Also, Hillary asked the butler to help her get ready for the trip, and she was good to go to Elizabeth's place. She was low-key shocked the lady got back to her so fast, but she didn't want to stall, so she got to her house ASAP. Some young guy who worked for Elizabeth greeted her, and the Marquise couldn't help but notice the whole house was gleaming. Hillary introduced herself to the servant and let him know that Mrs. Elizabeth had agreed to meet with her there. The young dude invited her in to chill for a bit, and she immediately felt all these eyes on her from other people in the house. Hillary even got a little self-conscious, thinking maybe she'd been a bit extra when she announced her title. Then she figured the gossip about what happened at the temple must have spread like crazy, which explained all the stares. All of a sudden, Hillary had this major urge to just bounce. Just as she heard someone call her name, Mrs. Elizabeth walked up, called out to her, and saved her from that super awkward situation and all the side-eye. The lady invited her guest to follow her and offered some snacks and sweets. Once they were in the study, Elizabeth admitted she wasn't expecting the Marquise to show up so fast, but she was totally cool with it. She also pointed out that people usually summon her to their homes, so she was a bit surprised by the personal visit. But Hillary wanted to show her intentions were legit by making a house call. The reason Elizabeth invited her in was because of Lady Julia's realness and humility. Then, with a totally bummed-out look, Hillary confessed to the lady that she seriously needed her help. Elizabeth's heart totally went out to her guest, who looked like a wilting flower, so she offered to help with like anything. The Marchioness started by saying she was a lone wolf with no pack to turn to. That's why she made the beeline right for her. The hostess was giving off major big sister energy, handing her a tissue and asking her to spill all the tea. The girl kicked off her sob story with her stepdad, Lord Adam, who apparently had no saplings of his own, so he adopted her. His whole game plan was to launch her into high society, but thanks to her humble roots, her spot in the social ecosystem was like way out in the weeds. Now she had the title of Marchioness, but she was still lacking a ton. Hillary basically put it out there that she hoped Mrs. Elizabeth could help her grow, and saw she was ready to say yes. Of course, this whole story was totally made up, but she had to weave that tale to get on the lady's good side. Hillary figured that playing the part of a shy, modest, and sensible little sprout would help her out, and even if she couldn't reach Julia's level of like Mother Earth level compassion, Elizabeth would still have her back. The lady paused for a sec, and the Marchioness thought the woman was getting shaky, but plot twist. She was the kind of person who always offered to help first, so Hillary couldn't figure out why she was getting the vibe wrong. She even started to freak out, thinking Elizabeth just wasn't into her, and began to lay it on thick, saying her request was probably a huge burden for her. The lady was like, not at all, saying it was literally no big deal to help the Marchioness out. But something else had totally caught her attention. She then admitted she was high-key intrigued by how the Marquis just up and married Hillary so suddenly. The girl instantly got it. Cristian's whirlwind decision was the thorn in Elizabeth's side, so she decided to stick with her strategy. This was actually a major win for her since it meant this woman was invested in her story, so Hillary kept reeling her in. The girl confessed she'd been crushing on the Marquis for a while, but was also super worried about him, because she knew Cristian had been completely weathering a storm of grief after the prince's wedding to Julia, and on that exact night, Hillary shot her shot and proposed they get married. The Marquis was a total mess, which is probably why he went for it. After he did something so wild for her, Hillary decided it was only fair to return the favor. That's when it all clicked for Elizabeth. She realized this girl had gone to the temple to do something sweet for her husband. The Marchioness then confirmed that her hubby had been generous, giving away what was his, but that generosity was a total one-way street. Everyone and their mother knew the Marquis had a special interest in Lady Julia, and that whole thing was sketchy to them. Anyway, Hillary kept going saying she knew her place in the food chain and understood that she wasn't even worthy of lacing up the princess's shoes. But as long as Mr. Cristian's head is in the clouds, and he doesn't give her the divorce papers she wants to pay him back. Elizabeth was a little thrown hearing those words. I mean, the girl had already successfully gotten her lands back, but she totally got where Hillary was coming from. And that's why she agreed to help her. The girl was stoked, and Mrs. Elizabeth decided right then and there to map out a whole training plan for her. Soon the lady was schooling her on everything from social protocol to what to watch out for. And even fashion. At first it was a total info dump, and the girl was struggling to process so much information. 'Cause the lady was basically downloading her entire brain into her. A few days later, a maid named Clarissa came up to Hillary and let her know the thief had finally been caught. This was awesome news for the Marchioness, since that dude had been a real pain in the capital for months, but this morning they totally busted him red-handed. The girl was thinking how the prince and Julia would finally stop doubting her, and low-key Hillary would have paid to see the looks on their faces when they got the news. Plus, the girl had gotten super tight with Elizabeth and was basically always in her learning era, so she knew the vibes were good as long as Clara stuck around. The Marquise wanted to check on how her husband was doing right then. The maid was kinda hesitant for a sec, but then spilled that the Marquis was with a guest in his study. This kinda threw Hillary for a loop, 'cause she didn't think Cristian was in any shape to be seeing people. So the Marquis started asking who it was, and found out it was some dude named Harold, a name the Crown Prince sometimes used on the down low, whenever he needed to go incognito. And now he'd shown up to see the Marquis right after the thief got caught. So Hillary decided to go see her husband. Even though she was confused why Cristian hadn't hit her up, she hurried over just to make sure things didn't get wild. Outside the Marquis's office, Hillary spotted the butler totally trying to eavesdrop. When he saw her, William tried to play it off, saying he was just worried things might pop off in there. But she totally got it and told him not to even sweat it. Then she sat right down next to the butler, and he told her they'd just been talking up until then. Then a few seconds after Hillary put her ear to the door, she heard some super sus noises. It sounded like shattering glass, and she didn't wait another second. Freaking out that her man was in danger, she burst into the office and saw the glass from the shattered window, and the Marquis's fist was all bloody. Standing next to her husband was John. But he didn't say anything, just stood there watching. Cristian looked like a total wreck, and a freaked-out Hillary rushed right over to him. She asked what was wrong and how he was feeling and was about to call for a doctor. Just then, Prince John finally spoke up, wanting to say something else to his old friend. Hillary realized the Marquis had gotten hurt because of him, and she immediately laid into the prince, telling him to get lost. The girl was a whole thunderstorm of angry, ready to do whatever it took right then and there to protect her husband from any more drama. John just stood there for a sec, but realized he couldn't do anything else right then. And while Hillary was still checking on her husband, he just turned and bounced. Cristian looked awful, and the Marquise tried to help him to the bed, begging him to just hang on because the doctor would be there soon. The Marquise tried to play it cool, like her fussing was nothing, but she could see right through him. His face was a total tell. Then Cristian started to take a nosedive, and the girl could barely keep him from collapsing. A little later, Hillary was sitting by her husband's bed. He'd passed out after the doc checked him out. The doctor explained the cut wasn't deep, and that this kind of thing happens when people get overwhelmed by their feels and can't hold it back. The girl was just relieved that Cristian was going to be okay, but she was also dying to know what they were talking about. Just then, the Marquise's eyes fluttered open, and Hillary was so shook she actually jumped a little. Cristian asked if she knew Prince John was coming today, and Hillary knew he was talking about her whole special ability thing. But she explained it didn't work like that. She couldn't get those kinds of deets. Then the Marquis admitted that he didn't actually want to, told the prince he wasn't welcome that day, adding that she never wanted to see him again ever. Cristian started flashing back to when John rolled up to his mansion, and seeing his old homie looking so wrecked, he started asking what was up. The Marquis was not in the mood to answer, and clapped back sarcastically that the prince was probably off living it up on his honeymoon. But for real, John had pulled up to get the tea straight from the source on whether the Marquis had actually tied the knot with Hillary. Cristian shot back that it wasn't just princes who got to get married. Literally anyone could do it. The prince found that marriage totally sus, completely out of character for the Marquis. At this point, Cristian was done playing it safe, especially since not being careful was exactly how the Marquis had fallen head over heels for Lady Julia. Then he confessed to his old friend that on that day, the day he got hitched, he decided to end his story, but she stopped him by using her psychic gift to just bust into his room. Then the girl asked the Marquis to marry her, and he agreed, adding later that it was really none of the prince's business. So John started grilling him, why didn't Cristian say anything if he was in so much pain? But back then, the Marquis and the prince were still tight, and he just couldn't bring himself to wreck their happiness. Now Cristian felt guilty for everything, for catching feelings and for wanting to check out John still didn't get why his friend was like this now, 'cause it wasn't his vibe before. He also mentioned Julia was worried sick about the Marquis, and that's why she hadn't slept at all. But Christian didn't get it because if she was so concerned, why didn't she slide into his DMs with even a single letter? Then it hit him that his old friend had only come over to roast him, and he totally lost it, demanding he get out of his house that instant. Christian punched the glass, cutting his fist. He realized now his attitude had been hella arrogant, even though he really just wished them both happiness. It's just that when they pushed him to the brink, he finally took a hard look at his own heart and couldn't deal. That's why Christian decided to unalive. And then he was so bummed when he survived. But now, thanks to Hillary, the Marquis was starting to figure some stuff out. And he decided to be 100 with himself. He thanked his wife big time and even cracked a small smile, which totally made her day. But then the girl argued that there was no need to thank her, 'cause she did it for herself. To Hillary, the Marquis was her entire world. And she was down to do absolutely anything for the person she loved. In the meantime, the prince went back to the palace and spilled all the tea to the princess about his meeting with the Marquis. Julia couldn't believe that Christian would decide to end things just because she married him. She was also totally shook that this young Hillary girl had stopped him and was now a marchioness. For Julia, there was no doubt that woman was a legit psychic, but the prince was getting some seriously sketchy vibes. John decided he first needed to figure out her real endgame for marrying the Marquis. Julia thought it over and soon agreed with her husband. For real, the whole situation seemed off. As for Hillary, the day the Marquis finally opened up his heart to her, she decided all over again to live for him. A few days later, the Marchioness got an invite to a get-together where the hostess announced that she was the guest everyone had been waiting for. A few days ago, when Hillary was at some training class, she got an invitation from Countess Pamela. The young woman showed the invite to Madame Elizabeth, who was completely floored. The Countess was throwing a tea party for a bunch of nobles trying to network, you know. The professor already knew the date of the whole shindig, but she was shook to get the invite so fast. That Countess was a total go-getter, and her power level was like right up there with Madame Elizabeth's. But Hillary was like, why is Madame so stressed about this invite? It made zero sense. Elizabeth, though, was on a whole other wavelength. She asked if the Marquise was going to RSVP, acting like it was this huge deal. The girl knew, though, they only invited her because they were being nosy. I mean, before she was a total nobody. Now she suddenly swooped in, took the Marquis's title, and even got the temple lands back. Talk about a glow-up. Hillary knew this could totally blow up into some major drama, but she also had to figure out what the Countess's vibe was right then. 'Cause in the OG story, this noble lady was like completely Switzerland about Julia. Plus, Pamela wasn't a goody-two-shoes or anything like Madame Elizabeth, and Hillary saw that as a major red flag. And the Countess wasn't even a main character, so now she had no clue how to deal with her. Meanwhile, Madame was still totally bugging out. 'Cause she wasn't just some basic noble. Hillary also had no idea what safe topic to even talk about if she decided to show up. And now she was totally overthinking it. She didn't know what Pamela was into, plus she was still a total noob at all the fancy etiquette stuff. But she couldn't just ghost the Countess either. Still, everything Hillary did, she did for her man, the Marquis Cristian. So she decided she'd go. And Elizabeth realized that even with all this drama, her student was only thinking about her husband. And if Hillary bailed on the invite, the Countess, being the drama queen she was, would totally start spreading nasty rumors about her. Elizabeth decided she was going to have this girl's back no matter what, because she thought she was a genuinely good person. Hillary got that Elizabeth was 100% on board, so she decided to accept the invite. A little while later, the Marquise was already rolling up to the Countess's estate, and the hostess was thanking everyone for coming. The young rich girls started thanking her for the invite, too. Hillary felt like she was way too close to the Countess for comfort, but her teacher had already taught her a few moves. Meanwhile, Pamela announced that they had a special guest that everyone was dying to meet. Then she shot a look at the Marquise like she expected her to just jump up and start saying hi. But Hillary held back for a sec, and Pamela basically told her to introduce herself to everyone right then and there. The girl remembered what Elizabeth taught her, that a bunch of older ladies would be at the tea party, so she should expect the Countess to look down on her since she was only 20 years old. Then her teacher decided to let her in on a little secret to instantly win over those ladies at the party. As the Marquise was replaying that lesson in her head, the Countess asked her why she was being so quiet, and Laurie explained she was just a little nervous being around so many VIP ladies. She said it super politely and humbly, which actually threw the other ladies for a loop. They realized the Marquise wasn't what the rumors said at all, and that the servants were probably just being extra. And Laurie also remembered the lesson about how giving compliments was key, but the most important thing was to make a killer first impression at the table. The whole chill vibe was kind of getting ruined by some serious curiosity, because the ladies were dying to know how Hillary became a Marquise. They also wanted all the tea on the drama with the temple over getting the land back. The girl was using every trick Elizabeth had taught her, and it totally worked. But then she decided it was time to get the Countess's take on Lady Julia. Hillary was low-key down to mess with the princess's rep a bit, but Pamela jumped the gun and asked if the Marquise's love life drama was bugging her. Hillary knew someone at the get-together would bring it up, and she was so ready. Elizabeth gave her a heads up that they'd ask just to check her reaction, not because they were actually curious. The Marchioness figured if she played dumb, everyone would either look down on her or just ghost her. She also knew the whole thing would spread like wildfire through the city. And get back to Julia. The ladies heard her say she wasn't sweating it since the Marquis considered it ancient history. The girl went home totally drained but happy the meeting actually paid off. The ladies were really vibing with her words about confronting Julia and had a good reaction. Plus, she realized those aristocrats weren't her fans, which would help her plan her next moves. From the Countess, Hilary found out that Julia was inviting young people who were tight with the imperial palace. The other ladies at the tea party were older and were not feeling the way the princess acted toward them. Still, Pamela sensed her trying to keep her cool. Even though the girl came from a humble background, she was a saint, and now they'd have to wait for an invite. Hilary even thought that's why they were staying neutral, 'cause Julia had been a total snooze fest for them. Besides, the girl was wondering if the prince was going to hit her up again. Since her prophecy totally came true, she'd be meeting with the princess and offered to pass along any questions from the countess. The girl explained to the ladies who were looking at her, all shook, that she had recently dropped off a letter at the imperial palace. She'd have more business there soon so she could give Julia the message from Pamela. The countess mulled it over and the Marchioness figured out that Her Majesty was interested. The girl also noticed she'd struck a nerve with that aristocrat, who shot back a super charming smile, though it was obviously fake. The Marchioness knew what that smile meant. She had them backed into a corner too. From now on, she could use them if she managed to dig up some useful dirt on Julia. Besides, if Hilary went after the countess, a major player in the high society scene along with the other lady, getting revenge would be way easier. The girl was dying to see their desperation, so she went back to check her diary. In that notebook, all the key events from the novel's original story were jotted down. First, there were notes about Cristian, and then Hilary recorded how things ended for John and Julia. She pieced together the events from her memory after the whole do-over, and now it was the foundation for her visions. The Marchioness flipped through several pages, thinking about where she could use her idea. When she found it, the girl figured it was a better fit for John, but she also needed something to use against Princess Hilary. She wanted to find the exact thing that could weaken St. Julia the most and fast. Then she remembered something and was sure no cap that it would leave the princess totally shook the next day. First thing in the morning, Hilary went to her husband to fill him in on her plan. She needed his permission, but a disturbing thought made her stop in her tracks. The girl hesitated for a sec since she wasn't sure if she could just walk into Cristian's room by herself. There she ran into the butler, who told her that the Marquis was just chilling in his office at that moment. When she heard that the Marchioness asked William to spill that she'd be visiting her hubby soon, the butler thought it was low-key sus that he always had to give a heads up to the big boss about his wife's visits. So he was like, yo, Hilary, just roll up on him, since the Marquis wasn't throwing shade her way anymore. She even felt kinda cringe making William run around like her personal messenger service, but she still told the butler to chill for a bit longer, since the Marquis's whole vibe wasn't 100% solid yet. The butler had no choice but to be like, "Aight bet," and headed back to Cristian. TBH, Hilary wanted to see her man like 24/7 morning, noon, and night just to peep that face she was crushing on. Her heart was totally popping off every time she ran into her husband, and she didn't want to do William dirty in the process. These past few days, Hilary felt like the Marquis was looking at her in a certain kind of way, but she always just brushed it off, thinking he was a total softie deep down, even when his face was giving major stank eye. The second she stepped into his office, homegirl immediately spilled her plans to go visit the crown prince's wife. At first, Cristian was like, "Oh, so the princess hit you up?" But she was like, "Nah, not yet." Still, she was pretty sure it was going to happen soon because she had some major tea to spill with Julia. The Marquis was totally unbothered by this, even though Hilary was hoping for a bigger reaction at a moment like that. Peeping her husband, the girl figured he was completely over Princess Julia. He was just curious why she decided to drag the butler into it with such a nothing burger of an update. Then Cristian told his wife not to hit him up with all the small stuff. He was like, just come straight in. Then after a beat, the Marquis added that Hilary could slide in for like literally any reason. This low-key shook her. She even started thinking her husband saw her as just some random girl. Cristian then remembered that just a few minutes ago, the butler had popped in to give him a heads up about his wife's arrival. He admitted that homegirl was still too shook to just walk in solo, which is why she asked for the pre-announcement. The Marquis was in the middle of reading a book at the time, but he put it down and called for Hilary to come in. William paused for a sec, and Cristian could tell he wanted to ask him something, so he was like, "What's up?" That's when the butler asked for the green light for the Marchioness to see her husband without his help. The whole thing seemed sus AF to the boss, since from day one she'd always just walked in without asking. Now, all of a sudden, she was acting all awkward, and the Marquis figured it was because of that first cringy meetup. He gave his wife the all-clear to enter without a heads up. But the butler asked for the boss to tell her himself face-to-face. The Marquis's first thought was that this would make Hilary super stoked, but also probably really extra. That's why when he saw her, he greenlit the visits, without any announcement from the butler. But when he saw her awkward vibe, he figured she wasn't really feeling it. And maybe she wasn't on board. Cristian even pictured her still bugging the butler with a heads up every time she wanted to visit. Hillary just stood there in front of her husband, too scared to say anything, looking like she felt super guilty about something. It hit the girl that she was basically making William's life harder just for her own convenience. Cristian broke the silence and told her she could dip if she had nothing else to say. That's when Hillary got her act together and spilled to the Marquis that she actually wanted to ask him for something else. The girl remembered that gorgeous pink diamond ring and asked if she could rock it for a bit. Cristian had to think, cause he had no clue why his wife was fiending for that ring. Hillary also promised she'd bring it right back as soon as she returned. From the prince's palace, the girl swore she'd be super careful with the bling and wouldn't even get a single scratch on it. The Marquis only needed to flex the ring one time to totally own Julia, so she was scheming. Cristian paused for a sec, thinking it over, and then he totally shot down his wife's request. The girl was shook. She had no clue why he'd do that, and she thought he was still simping for the princess. But then the Marquis was like, he didn't want to just loan it to her. He wanted her to rock it forever. Then he reached into the desk drawer, pulled out a little box, and handed it to his wife. The girl was for real completely floored, cause that ring used to be a huge deal to the Marquis, but he said what he said. Cristian accepted that it just wasn't in the cards for him to be with the person he was so into. That's why he figured the ring was basically a free agent now. That diamond had been picked out to totally vibe with the princess's soft pink hair as a wedding present back in the day. Cristian poured his whole heart into picking that piece, but he never got the chance to give it to her. Hillary was stoked to accept the bling and thanked her husband for real for something so gorgeous. The girl promised she wouldn't bug him anymore and was about to dip from his office. The Marquis noticed Hillary had this look like she was about to throw down. He had zero intention of getting up in her business, and he totally trusted her, so he just wished her good luck. After her meeting with the Marquis, Hillary wanted to slide into the princess's DMs right away via the butler to ask for a meeting, but then she remembered William had enough drama already, without piling on more, so she decided to handle it herself. It looked like Julia was totally waiting for her move, cause she got a reply instantly. Meanwhile, Hillary was thinking about how she came back here on her own terms and was now 100% ready. The girl had prepped all the tea that would help her cancel Prince John in one single move. She even got a pink diamond ring from Cristian to send a message to Julia. Plus, Hillary was hyped that the Marquis had given it to her for keeps, and she was always checking it out, even though when she first got the gift, the whole situation felt kinda awk. She couldn't really feel the joy at first, but it was the first present she'd gotten from her man, and now she didn't even care that it was meant for the princess before. What mattered to the Marquis now was that her husband gave it to her himself, and she was hoping he was finally over his feelings for Julia. A little while later, Hillary rolled up to the palace looking like a total queen and was met there by the princess. The Marquis clocked that Julia's face got a little tight when she saw her and knew her plan was starting to pop off. Still, the girl thanked the prince's wife politely for letting her come through, but the princess was super curious why the Marquis had decided to link up with her. Hillary noticed again that Julia was already used to looking down on people and had totally nailed the whole prince's wife vibe. The Marquis told her she just wanted to show her appreciation for her highness. Meanwhile, Hillary casually touched her face, making sure the ring would catch the light right in front of Julia's eyes. The move totally worked, and the princess's whole vibe shifted instantly, even though she tried to play it cool. Julia 100% recognized that piece of jewelry, the one the Marquis had poured his whole heart into. Impossible to forget. Hillary was just waiting for the princess to react, but she just hit her with a chill smile. For a hot second, the Marquis thought she didn't even recognize her, which was a total bummer. But she wasn't about to quit while the girls were just chilling over snacks. Hillary kept clocking the princess's expressions, and pretty soon she pieced it together. Julia totally knew what the ring was, but was playing dumb so she wouldn't blow her cover. On top of that, the Marquis got the vibe that Julia was even more scared of her than before, but she had zero intention of backing down. So Hillary pulled out a small envelope and asked if the princess had tested out her special ability yet. The Marquis figured it'd be way better to use it to help out the country, so she jotted down what they needed to prep for the future. Meanwhile, Hillary kept flexing the ring in the princess's face to basically scream that she was on top. For the prince, she had a whole different plan cooked up. It was about the borders of the old duchy. The Marquis explained that some bandits had shown up in the area, but for real they weren't bandits at all. She described them as enemy forces who came to test the Empire's defenses. Hillary remembered that in the last timeline, John ran into a ton of trouble because he figured out what was up way too late. It all went down because the crown prince had to handle the beef with the enemy all by himself. He was trying like crazy to stop it from blowing up into a full-on war. He managed to stop the conflict from becoming a war and cut a deal with them, but that deal had a major catch. Foreign merchants would get to run their businesses on imperial land with zero fees. This whole thing was major gossip among the people, along with the fact that Cristian was a superstar diplomat, who probably could have gotten way better terms. But the Marquis wasn't into it back then, so she completely bailed on those negotiations with the prince. Julia wondered why the Marquis decided to spill this tea to her instead of going straight to John. The princess thought that if she was really worried about the Empire, she should have just given the prince a heads up immediately. Then Hillary asked about the next tea party that Her Majesty was throwing. Julia felt the question was way out of line since it was super sensitive stuff. The Marquis realized her training with the lady hadn't been for nothing because she could basically read the princess's mind now. Hillary immediately put on a shocked face and started apologizing, claiming she was still clueless about all the proper etiquette. She explained she brought a helpful prophecy and figured it would be easier for Julia to pass along the info. The Marquis thought that if she'd had any sense, she probably wouldn't have even asked that question. The princess understood that the info about the tea party was nothing compared to the intel she just got from Hillary. She added that she'd host a get-together soon, but for now she had nothing else to say. But Julia promised she'd send a letter to the Marquis the second she made a decision. She also decided not to punish Hillary for being so bold this time. She gave her a look reminding her that she was the princess, heir to this country, and that the rules had to be respected. The Marquis promised not to mess up again and made a quick exit. Hillary understood that the sweet beloved saint from the romance novel was officially dead and gone in this world. Still, the Marquis couldn't resist, and as she bowed, she angled her hand so the ring would flash right in the princess's face. Julia felt that same deep gut punch all over again, and this time she snapped. The princess asked where Hillary got that ring, assuming Cristian had given it to her. The woman, totally thrilled that she finally noticed, proudly confirmed her husband had given it to her. Then she started to was flexing about how stoked she was with the gift, acting like she had no clue how the Marquis even found the time to prep it for her. Hillary peeped the princess's vibe, how she was dying to claim the ring was actually hers, and was totally living for the conflicted look on Julia's face. She knew her plan was just getting started. The whole point was for the princess to fall right into the trap set by that pink diamond ring. But for now, Hillary kept up the innocent act, saying she never expected her husband to be so over-the-top generous. She also acted like she had no idea how rare the gem was, or that the Marquis had already given it to a jeweler to get it sized. The piece was detailed AF, giving off the impression Cristian had planned it way in advance. All the while, Hillary was just waiting for the princess to crack so she could read her like an open book. At the same time, she was glad the other girl couldn't read her mind, but she clocked that Julia had gone totally pale. Then the Marquis suggested out loud that maybe the ring wasn't flashy enough for the princess's taste. Julia immediately started denying it, saying it was just plain gorgeous, even though she was stuttering like crazy. Meanwhile, Hillary kept pushing her rival's buttons, claiming it was the first time she'd ever seen a pink diamond, and now she just couldn't imagine how she'd ever lived without knowing something so beautiful existed. Hillary kept the performance going theatrically, raising her hand with the ring right up in the princess's personal space. After twisting the ring a little, she gushed that the diamond was a perfect match for Her Majesty's hair color, all while the Marquis kept her eyes glued to Julia's face, watching it change like she was about to pass out. Only when the princess's face started looking kinda greenish did Hillary move on to the next phase. She immediately slapped a shocked look on her face. It was like she'd just uncovered the most brutal truth. Then she voiced her realization that she finally understood who the ring was *really meant for. At that point, Julia was totally speechless, and the Marquis was low-key confused about why she hadn't snapped yet. Hillary even wondered if the princess actually wanted to see her happy and clueless. The Marquis couldn't figure out why the princess was still holding it together. It was like she was determined to tough it out. So with a sad face on the verge of tears, Hillary repeated that she never would have guessed who the ring's real owner was supposed to be. That's when the princess finally snapped out of her trance. She started comforting the Marquis, assuring her it wasn't her fault at all. Meanwhile, Julia would have rather stayed clueless and couldn't get why Hillary would drop such a cruel truth bomb on her. Until now, the princess's life had been pretty chill. Sure, there were some conflicts and setbacks, but at the end of the day, she was still considered a saint, and she always tried to do the right thing. But since she was being painted as the villain this time, she apologized to the Marquis, because she still had a conscience. Hillary, for her part, started apologizing back, saying that thanks to Julia, she had relearned her own limits. But Julia kept insisting that she was the one who should be thanking the Marquis for saving Cristian's life. The Marquis explained she was just able to help someone she cared about with her skills, and now she'd protect him forever. At that moment, Hillary caught a super weird look from the princess, like a silent threat. Even so, Julia managed to force out a few words of goodwill. Then she suddenly shot up as if she was about to bounce immediately, and Hillary realized all of this had hit Julia way harder than she'd expected. But she was totally satisfied with the outcome. A little later, the Marquis, she got back home where the butler greeted her again, totally sensing her meeting had been a major win, and the woman confirmed it. She said everything went super smooth and was crazy productive, and then she asked how the Marquis was doing today. William shared that the master had been wandering through the garden all morning before retreating to his office, where he'd been posted up ever since. Hillary suggested that Butler grab some more of the novels Cristian loves to binge read whenever he's feeling low. The butler was again low-key, shook by how many little details this woman knew. Then he asked what her next move was. The Marquis said her top priority for the rest of the day was to visit her husband. She'd told him that morning she wanted to hit up the palace, and now she wanted to fill him in on how it all went down. She was suddenly in a huge rush to see the Marquis, and the second she walked into his office, he immediately asked about Julia. The young woman caught a vibe that he was acting a little off today. She wanted the lowdown like right then on why this whole thing was even planned, but Christian just kept going saying that the Marquis could see the future and asked if she saw the princess being happy. Hillary couldn't really figure out why her husband had even asked that question out of the blue. He had a slightly curious look, but she just couldn't answer him right then and there, 'cause she knew Julia was about to lose her healing power. The Marquis remembered that after His Highness's light went out, that couple's relationship completely withered. The entire empire mourned the loss of such a talented man, and a storm of crisis rocked the country all over again. It was in that chaos that Princess Julia lost her divine healing power. The cause was a total mystery, but with her powers gone, Julia also lost her status as an untouchable saint. After that, she was just a beautiful girl with a kind heart, and people quickly drifted away from her. The crown prince started getting completely burned out by all the political drama and couldn't give his wife the time of day. Maybe things would have gotten better if they'd had a kid, but Hillary hadn't even considered that before her whole resurrection thing. Facing the Marquis, the girl was scrambling to find the right words, knowing Julia's future wasn't exactly looking sunny. Hillary knew that if she lied, the truth would come out eventually, so she decided to just play dumb. If she revealed the truth to her husband, the Marquis was terrified he might run back to that girl. But in that moment, it was like Christian could read her mind and he swore he was totally over Julia. But then she just didn't get it. If that was true, why was he even asking about her? Plus his expression was a total dead giveaway, but Hillary loved him like crazy and couldn't lose him. She decided it wasn't worth hiding the truth from him, and though she hesitated for a sec, she finally came clean. Hillary revealed that Princess Julia would soon lose her ability to heal. That news totally threw the Marquis for a loop. He couldn't wrap his head around how that could even happen. The girl also really didn't want her husband to start thinking about the princess again, so she decided to hit him with something else. With a totally heartbroken look, Hillary told him that she herself would soon lose her power. The girl insisted she had no clue why any of this was happening, and that after it did, she wouldn't be able to see anything. Christian took her words to mean that losing her abilities would only happen if she died, but the girl wasn't so sure. Since there was also a chance she'd survive and just live like a regular person, that's why before all this went down, the Marquise was laser-focused on wrapping up all her plans right then and there. Hillary wasn't even sweating death since her powers hadn't withered away yet. Christian hit her with, "So when exactly is this whole thing you told me about gonna go down?" The girl fessed up that it would be in like about a year, and that Julia would be thriving till the end of her days. Afterwards, Hillary peeped that the Marquis was totally checked out, not even caring about the princess's health. She wanted to tell him something else, but Christian just asked her to bounce and leave him alone as she was leaving his office. The girl was stressing, thinking she'd said the wrong thing, and was scared the Marquis was about to make another boneheaded move. She wished she had the gift to actually take care of someone and make them feel better. A little while later, Madame Elizabeth rolled up on the Marquise. She noticed her student was in a total funk after that last chat with her husband. The girl couldn't catch any sleep and was feeling super down. Christian was also ghosting her, and she was getting crickets from the princess, which was seriously bugging her out. Elizabeth started getting sus, thinking the girl's whole vibe was off because of her visit with the prince's wife. But no matter how bummed Hillary was, she had to stick to the script and flipped her actress switch back on. The young woman spilled that she got super nervous when she went to the audience and brought the ring from the Marquis with her. That's where she found out that ring was the one Christian wanted to give the princess. Back before she was even married. The second Julia saw the bling, she recognized it instantly, and that tea totally shook Elizabeth. Hillary also figured some things are better left in the dark, and wished His Highness would be a little more tuned into her. Elizabeth got all in her feels for her student. And now she was the one who needed to chill, but her reaction still seemed kinda weak sauce to the Marquise, who confessed she was actually majorly stressing. She spilled all her fears that the crown prince's wife would now try to break her and the Marquis up. Then Hillary, looking totally downcast, started asking her mentor for advice, who was always ride or die for her husband. But Elizabeth assured the young woman that the prince's wife would never pull a move like that because she'd always been a total sweetheart to everyone. Madame was sure the princess would never do something so shady. She figured Hillary probably just got the wrong end of the stick that day. And if so, Elizabeth would score a meeting and talk to Julia face to face. Madame got so torn up about it that the Marquise had to be the one to calm her down, and when they were done, she just let her go. After all that, Hillary felt totally drained and decided to take a stroll through the garden. Out of nowhere, she heard Christian's voice, right behind her. He walked up with a small bouquet of flowers, and the girl was pretty surprised, but more by his better mood than the flowers. Just a few minutes earlier, he was wandering through the pergola with the butler nearby. William knew that since the lady arrived, the Marquis's mood had improved big time, but the butler wasn't digging that he spent all his time cooped up and suggested he try a hobby. He decided to get into flower arranging, and William brought him more blooms to keep at it. What he'd already brought just didn't seem like enough, so he made it his mission to get another batch. Even though those flowers were enough for him, he didn't want to get into it with William. A message just came in from the prince, who managed to dodge a major crisis, all thanks to Hillary's intel. And Christian was totally hyped that her skills were so next level she could literally decide the country's fate. Besides, she had also saved his butt. And as he was thinking about that, he spotted the Marquise not too far off. Then he remembered that she herself had said her powers would be fading out soon, and that she wanted to get all her plans locked in before they did. He finally decided to shoot his shot, grabbing the bouquet he'd prepped and rolling up on his wife, who was like totally shook that the Marquis would actually gift her a bouquet of flowers, and her brain was basically glitching. Handing them over, he was gearing up to say something to his wifey, using a super sweet tone. At that moment, Hillary's mind went to some wild places, but she tried to keep her chill. The Marquis clocked her pensive vibe and thought she was probably hating the flowers, but he decided to give them to her anyway. Locking in on her again, he offered the bouquet like no wasn't an option. But like Cristian totally misjudged his own strength and basically shoved the flowers at her so hard he nearly knocked her over. The butler saw the whole thing and immediately bolted over to her all concerned while the Marquis was like, "My bad, I just wanted to talk." When William got back, he was so confused about where his boss had dipped to during the flower arranging class and went to find him. Hillary, meanwhile, was kind of floored that her husband would pull a move like that, and for his part he figured they'd just chat later. But she cut him off, insisting they talk right then and there, promising she was totally fine. The guys, however, were still stressing about her. And so the Marquis made the final call to talk to her some other time. Hillary decided to go handle the dinner prep, but she was planning on circling back to her husband a little later. Walking into the room, she spotted this gorgeous bouquet of fragrant white roses on the table. The girl was buzzing, and not just because of the flowers. It was the fact that her man had so many hidden talents. Besides, she'd never seen the Marquis make bouquets before, and that was definitely not in the OG novel. Cristian, who was hanging around nearby, noticed that Hillary was all smiles at first. But then out of nowhere, she got this thorny look on her face for some reason. In that instant, she caught a glimpse of her husband cracking a small smile, and she even spun around to double-check. The Marquis was already back to his usual stone-cold expression, but Hillary was 100% sure he'd smiled. Even so, she was just glad their conversation had ended on a good vibe. Cristian walked up to his wife again and repeated that he really wanted to tell her something. The girl literally got goosebumps from how smooth his voice sounded, even though he totally thought he'd spooked her. But despite that, Cristian just kept going and hit her with a question he'd already asked before. He wanted to know why she picked him, and Hillary couldn't figure out why the Marquis was so pressed about this. It started to dawn on her that her husband was getting sus about her plans for payback. Hillary started bugging, thinking she was about to be exposed. Her whole expression shifted for a sec. Then she cooled down to answer, and started saying that he was her favorite. The Marquis just figured she meant he was like a super important player in her future plans. Suddenly, they both just froze like they were speaking totally different languages. The Marquis especially was super intrigued by why she'd called him a word he'd literally never heard before. Hillary was still stuck in place for a hot second, trying to find the right words. She was low-key kicking herself for the slip-up because now she had to explain it somehow. Cristian guessed it was a foreign language, but even he had never heard it, so he figured it must be some ancient dead language. The girl didn't get why the Marquis was so hung up on this word, because in the original story he was this brainy science-type dude. So Hillary just laid it all out for him, saying the word basically meant the person you cherish the most. Cristian was low-key buggin', because like he totally got what love was, but for him it had only ever been a wicked storm. She caught his vibe and was like, "Chill, I'm talking more about a super deep connection with someone you protect." That totally clicked for the Marquis, and he confessed, "No cap, I had no idea you were so obsessed with flowers." Cristian promised his wifey he'd send her even more flowers to keep her happy, because the Marquis was seriously thinking she was a huge flower stan. But then he wanted to switch it up and talk about something else. He started second-guessing her skills, and Hillary was like, "Oh, so he's still doubting me." But the Marquis basically concluded that the future she predicted hadn't even arrived on the scene yet. And if you can change the present, then the future would get a total makeover too. Hillary had no idea why the Marquis was suddenly having these brainwaves. Those ideas, but she decided to hear him out. Cristian kept going, reminiscing about the day she saved him and how he'd be totally pushing up daisies otherwise. The Marquis explained that with that one move, she had totally rerouted the future, and now it was on a whole new timeline. The girl was still lost on where he was going with this, but she couldn't stop admiring his big brain. Cristian had heard about the border zone through John, but me surviving has nothing to do with that whole mess. Then he asked the girl to get way more specific with her predictions about that part, and the moments leading up to his death. Hillary got a massive case of déjà vu, feeling like she'd heard those exact words before, and it was giving her major time paradox vibes. The whole situation with the border zone was unfolding in the exact same way as it did before her rebirth, but there was no guarantee it would be a repeat. The girl was stressing that if her prediction didn't actually happen, her whole lie would get exposed way earlier than she expected. The Marquis was assuming that Hillary had witnessed some majorly important event in the future that he needed her for. He was dead sure that was the reason he saved her, and the girl remembered he had just mentioned that a little while ago. But she remembered that in the original story he died like right after this, so there are no future events that even involve him. In that moment, Hillary just thought it would have been so much better if Cristian had actually survived. She stayed quiet, and the Marquis figured she was struggling to talk, but he was desperate to know the truth. Hillary was finding it hard to speak, because he was so close to her and being so persistent. But in the end, she admitted that the Marquis wouldn't die, he would survive, and she doesn't think the future will change either. That the world would just keep on spinning the same as before, even without him. And the Marquis accepted what his wife said, then sadly added that, whether he's here or not, the planet's gonna keep on turning. He also admitted that he's not that important of a person, whose existence could actually change the future. Hillary was bummed out by his words, and because the Marquis was back in his depressive funk. In that moment, she realized he was just a side character like dust getting stepped on, and as long as there were a few main characters in this world, Cristian would never get the main character energy. Suddenly, the young woman shouted that the Marquis didn't need to change the whole world to be somebody great. She added that it was enough for Cristian to be the entire world for just one single person. And if he managed to change that one person, that already meant he was a big deal in this world. The Marquis still wasn't picking up what she was putting down, since he didn't think anyone actually needed him. But Hillary broke it down for him again this time, saying that she was the one who needed him, and that he was her treasure, not the flowers. In that exact second, the butler just randomly appeared right in front of them, trying to figure out what they were doing there. This totally annoyed Hillary, but William instantly explained that he just came to let them know that dinner was ready. The girl was still cringing at herself for letting that word slip out again. Even though the whole thing was basically over, Cristian, for his part, just started cracking up. Like someone just told him the funniest joke ever. The Marquis and the butler were totally clueless about what was up with their master. But at the same time, they were so stoked to see him laugh. And Laurie was zeroed in on Cristian's laugh, a sound she knew by heart. In the OG story, he only ever laughed like that when he was chilling with Princess Julia. For a sec. The girl even thought she'd made a total fool of herself in front of him, but honestly, it didn't even bring her down. Then the Marquis went over to the butler with a small ask, but you could tell it was a big deal to him now while William was all ears. Cristian asked the servant to whip up a nice dinner for them. After that, the guys bounced to do their own thing while Hillary headed to her room to get ready for dinner, but she couldn't stop thinking about how the Marquis had gone to the butler with a request, and not like his usual command. For some reason, that just hit different. So much so that she couldn't even focus on her food or taste a single bite for real. She was vibing with seeing these different sides of Cristian, especially loving that post-dinner smile. The girl was hoping to crash hard, all wrapped up in a soft blanket. But when she got to her room and opened the door, she got a majorly pleasant surprise. Hillary couldn't even believe her eyes. The entire room was basically a floral explosion. The Marquise had no clue what it all meant, and then bam, she spotted a gorgeous bouquet. It was the one Cristian had put together for her, and now it was sitting on her nightstand. The girl remembered the Marquise's words, how he'd promised to send her more flowers. And now she got what he'd asked the butler for. Still, she had a hunch this insane amount of flowers wasn't exactly what the Marquis had ordered. This was all William being extra for sure. But even though her room was giving major secret garden vibes, Hillary was totally here for it. Meanwhile, Cristian was posted up in his office, replaying the convo with his wife, especially that word, darling. The next day, the Marquise decided to write a letter to get the tea on the current situation, and she got it sorted out quick. She'd gotten zero reply from Julia, and couldn't get a hold of the Countess either. Hillary was planning on sending this letter out today, so now she needed to track down the butler. The girl tried to wrangle all those flowers on her own, but it was just way too much. The Marquise went to William's office to ask for help, but when she walked in, he was nowhere in sight. It even felt kinda sus, 'cause the maid had said he'd be there, but all she saw were mountains of paperwork. Suddenly, Hillary heard the butler's faint voice, trying to say hi to her. After pushing all the papers onto the floor, the girl saw William passed out on the desk, looking super weak. He was mumbling for the Marquise to take care of the master, and she shook him to try and wake him up. Hillary instantly figured out what happened. He usually runs on less than 3 hours of sleep a day. William blushed, totally embarrassed that his lady found him like that. Meanwhile, she was fuming about the lack of any labor laws. The butler explained he had to work on the master's behalf, 'cause he couldn't handle his own business. To the girl, though, the whole situation was still giving off weird vibes. So William was totally fine up until yesterday, and he was for sure handling the Marquis' business. But it was only the super urgent stuff, and dude was barely sleeping 3 hours a night. He spilled that he could count on one hand the number of times the boss man had even cracked a smile before he got all gloomy. Now the butler was stoked that the lady could make him laugh, and totally thought she had the Marquis on lock. Then William just dropped out of nowhere, and the lady started checking on him again, giving him this kinda sus sideways look. The butler started begging the Marquise to take over running the whole county estate, but she was like, "I'm just the fake wife here," plus Hillary had literally never done anything like that and had no clue how to run the show. William promised he'd teach her the ropes, but she was dead sure the Marquis would never go for it, so the butler decided he'd just have to ask the boss himself for the green light. Hillary was still low-key doubting, though. Then she was like, "Where's my hubby at?" and found out he was chilling on the terrace. William explained that the master was into his hobby today, having a whole tea ceremony vibe out there. Before he could even finish his sentence, Hillary had already bolted from his office and was booking it to her husband. She got to him looking a little frazzled. Meanwhile, he was just vibing, getting ready to sip some tea, and at the same time he was curious why his wife was so worked up this morning that she showed up totally out of breath. The girl explained she had some majorly urgent business, which is why she had to sprint over to the Marquis. Cristian was like, "Running is good for you," and then offered her tea again. That kind of threw Hillary off from whatever else was on her mind. I mean, she didn't expect his favorite to be served tea by the man himself. And while the Marquis was working his magic with the teapot to pour for his wife, she was trying to tell him something. But for real, the girl was so winded from running it was hard to. They had to talk business like immediately. Of course, Hillary wasn't about to curve the tea her man was offering, but she had some super urgent stuff to handle, and the Marquis was totally cool with it. Turns out he wanted to talk to her too, and told her to take a seat. He got the hint that the Marquis wasn't in a tea mood, and moved the cups away. While she was mentally kicking herself for being so rushed, Cristian asked why she was looking for him, and she just couldn't get her request started. The girl clocked his whole vibe and noticed his gaze got all soft when he looked at her. But then she realized she might have been reading it a little wrong, chalking it up to what went down yesterday and that whole favorite thing. Still, she figured that was way better than seeing the look of some tired old dude in his eyes. While Hillary was lost in thought, the Marquis asked her again what was up with the early and urgent visit. The girl fessed up that the butler had asked her to take charge of the estate and run it. She explained he was swamped with work and couldn't handle it solo anymore. She also mentioned it was super awkward for the butler to ask, especially since she was his fake wife and all. Before, the Marquis hadn't trusted anyone with the job to make sure it was done right. Now he got that by trying to do everything. He wasn't really living his best life. Hillary smiled when she saw he wanted to lighten his own load. That's why William's request kinda stung. For a sec, there was this silence between them that they both just vibed with. The Marquis, for his part, was thinking over his answer, cause he had zero doubts about his wife now. He'd already let her handle their private business. Mostly cause she could basically read his mind. At the same time, Cristian had something to tell his wife too. But then he handed her an envelope from the prince. Hillary gave it a curious look, not getting why the prince needed the Marquis again. But when she opened the letter, she realized it was addressed to her, and that John was asking her to meet up. The girl. She got the memo that her skills were needed for the whole Borderlands situation, and that the prince was basically desperate for help, but still, she was dead set on using her gift for Cristian only, so she was about to curve John's request, but decided to run it by her husband first. He in turn had no clue why she was even asking him. Hillary was stressing that because of the upcoming secret meetup with the prince, some nasty rumors might start spreading. The Marquis just gave a dismissive little smirk. Cause he couldn't just ignore the secret meeting, and that low-key freaked her out. She refused to do anything without Cristian being in the loop. The very thought of doing otherwise made her mad, plus she hated the whole idea, even if she rolled up to the meeting with 100 people. In that moment, the Marquis had a flashback to when Julia confessed she was crushing on John, and it totally broke his heart. Then he refocused on Hillary, and realized this girl was a whole different vibe. Still, he suggested she meet with the prince. Cause the guy's persistent, and if you turn him down, he'll just keep hitting you up. Then he asked Hillary to stop constantly calling him a Marquis, since no one calls her a Marquis' wife. Cristian leaned in toward his wife like he was about to spill some major tea, and he begged her to call him by his name. The girl, of course, had dreamed about this, but she totally wasn't expecting it, and she whispered his name. She loved it so much she couldn't hold back and shouted his name, but then she instantly got her composure back. Still, she felt kinda embarrassed, and after wishing her husband a good day, she basically bolted right then and there. Cristian noticed he'd spilled the teacup, but honestly, he couldn't care less. Hillary, meanwhile, felt like she was burning up with embarrassment. And she sprinted past the butler, nearly knocking him flat. A little later, the prince showed up at her place and was seriously scoping out the Marquis's room. But she was thinking it wasn't a museum, so there was zero reason for him to be staring so hard. A little while before she had hit him up, with a message saying she was down for the meeting, and he was super interested in visiting her at home. Plus, he showed up using the name Harold. So they decided to meet him right in her room, not in the open salon. This guy wasn't the type who strictly played by the book, so Hillary was just hoping everything would go smoothly. The girl didn't get why the prince was staring at her room so intensely, especially since not even the Marquis had ever been in there before. Meanwhile, John spotted some papers on the table and realized the Marquis was handling Cristian's internal affairs on the down low. The girl explained that her husband had given her the green light days ago, and she was going to handle everything herself. The prince started looking over the documents, and he saw they were so detailed you could get the gist at a glance. He also realized that the more he got to know her, the more amazing talents he discovered she had. In the meantime, Hillary casually offered the guests some tea, and she invited him to take a seat at the tea table. John went quiet for a second, then started saying that all of this was for the good of the great Imperia. Not totally getting his vibe, the girl looked at him more intently and nearly dropped her cup. The prince made it clear that her prediction about the situation at the border had been super helpful, and now he was giving her the info directly. Then John pointed out that the Marquise had previously expressed that she wanted to use her ability to help out the nation. The girl decided to turn him down nicely and promised to act like she hadn't heard any of it. She broke it down for him, explaining her husband's health was still a bit rocky, and for now she wanted to just focus on him and running her household. The prince was like totally clueless why her home life was a bigger deal than the country's problems, but the Marchioness's world was a closed garden not open to state affairs. Hillary made it clear she only got these major future peaks every now and then. John was still not getting it. Like, why did she spill the tea on the border situation? That was a whole different ecosystem from just managing her estate. But she was only really after the meeting date and just dropped that info as a trade. The prince was kind of salty about it, and asked why she wasn't shook, even though she was formally meeting with Harold. John also thought it was super self-centered that the Marchioness planned to use her gift just for her own gain. But Homegirl saw nothing weird with that. She was just putting her man first, period. Then she clapped back, saying while the prince and princess were all wrapped up in their own happiness, the Marchioness was thinking about a friend they'd left high and dry. That totally got John's attention, and she just hoped he wouldn't pull any more stupid stunts. The prince, meanwhile, was trying to figure out how to reclaim the high ground because she was not making this a walk in the park. Then all of a sudden John started choking and hacking like crazy while Hillary was like, "Chill, the tea's fine, I literally grew it myself." But the prince kept on with his coughing fit for a bit, and she was thinking something was seriously off with him. Then he explained that the tea tasted exactly like the stuff Julia makes for him. The deal is, even though the princess was a total smoke show, she always brewed tea as bland as ditch water. That made the Marchioness's blood boil. For real, the prince had the nerve to say her brew tasted like swamp water. She couldn't believe her own hand-picked tea could be so lifeless. I mean, she brewed it herself with the exact same leaves. The Marchioness decided to fact-check him, took a sip, and instantly regretted her life choices. It tasted like literally nothing. At that point, the prince figured the small talk portion of their chat was officially dead. So he suggested they get down to business, asking what the Marchioness wanted. Without even blinking, she demanded the lands of the late Duke Oliver and a major status and title glow-up for her husband. The first demand was basically a power move to show Hillary was the complete opposite of Julia, by snatching up the late Caroline's legacy. The second part was to prove Cristian wasn't to blame for the whole mess Julia caused. You know, the whole situation with Oliver's daughter dying. The prince couldn't give her a straight answer on that right then and there, because the emperor had the final say. But those were her non-negotiables for him to get access to her special skills. Hillary already knew the prince couldn't just greenlight those terms solo, so she sweetened the pot with another proposal. If John put it in writing, she'd have his back, and if some super urgent crisis dropped, John would have to grant her request like immediately. The crown prince mulled it over for a sec, and then caved to her terms, promising the paperwork would be on its way ASAP. She was pretty stoked with how that went down, and John basically bounced from her place in a hurry. The prince was so desperate for her skills that he agreed to everything without getting into the nitty-gritty. It was also possible he was just banking on the fact that Hillary would never find a real reason to cash in that favor. And while John was looking down on her from his ivory tower, she held the seeds that could grow Cristian into the tallest tree in this empire's forest. The very next day, Hillary got a letter from the princess. It was Julia setting up a tea date. Even though she was waiting on the prince's paperwork, the Marchioness got ready right away and went to see Pamela. Who would have guessed the prince was so hyped about her loyalty? Hillary was the first one to spill the tea to the countess. 'Cause she was all about keeping promises. You know, the girl figured a letter would be way too slow, plus a face-to-face chat just hits different. The Marquis pulling up in person totally charmed the countess, who was shook but in a good way. Pamela also asked if the princess had dropped any major tea in the letter. Hillary admitted Julia was planning to invite some of the noble girls to a get-together. It just wasn't really the princess's vibe to throw these bougie parties all the time, and Pamela got that it would be tough for her. Besides, the countess had a hunch Julia would hit up Lady Elizabeth for help, and she was not feeling that at all. Straight up, she just didn't like her. Having someone with that much clout in her social circle with her whole neutral act, it basically meant that having the lady around was a major burn for her. But the fact that Pamela invited the Marquise over was a sign she was cool with her, and Hillary decided to run with it. She knew Julia was just a normal girl before her big saint glow-up, which is why the lady was tutoring her. Meanwhile, Hillary played dumb about why Elizabeth would help her with such a major event, even imagining that the princess just had no clue how awesome the countess was. Pamela paused for a sec, then admitted she was basically thinking the same thing. Then, Hillary threw it out there, that it would be a struggle for the nobles, including her and the countess, to get on the princess's good side, after that massive flood last year. But the king's job is to look out for his people, and the nobles stepping in would just start drama. Totally pointless drama. The province was wrecked by the flood, and Julia was shook by how savage the villagers were being. She asked the aristocrats who showed up at the temple for help, but the king was too busy trying to cover up some tragic drama happening behind the scenes. The other nobles couldn't do a thing because they had no business meddling in another territory's issues. Only John and Cristian actually listened to Julia's call for help, and ever since the prince has been crushing on her even harder. Cristian just got stuck with all the paperwork instead of the prince basically cleaning up his messes. Then Hillary added that either way, His Majesty was super disappointed in the nobles back then. On top of that, the girl suggested building some secret passages in the castle walls if that's what the countess was into. At the next tea party, the Marquise planned to cook up a situation to make the prince's wifey look totally bad. That's when Pamela would swoop in with her skills and save Julia. The princess is a simple soul, and in her relationships, she just follows a moral compass, a really high one. And after the Countess helps her out, Julia would feel chill enough to open up to her. As she laid out her plan, the Marquise noticed Pamela was hesitating a little and might just say no. The Countess was kinda sus about why this girl was helping her when it made more sense for Pamela to become her social mentor. The aristocrat was still on the fence, but she promised the Marquise she'd think about the offer. Back home, Hillary was replaying the meeting in her head and just couldn't figure out why the Countess was being so hesitant. She also got an appointment letter from Prince John and an imperial pass. The girl was like, wow, that was fast. Which just proved the prince was desperate for her skills. And if that was the case, she figured she should press her advantage, and for starters decided to get the lowdown on Julia's prep. The Marquise totally dove back into the diary. She was hunting for some intel, and pretty soon she found something that was a total vibe for the next day. The girl wanted to hit up the meeting with the prince, but first she planned on giving Cristian a heads up. The morning, however, did not pass the vibe check, and she was rolling to the palace with her husband. Like the day before, the Marquis had asked his wife if she was still down to go to the palace, and she was like, bet. Then she saw something crazy beautiful, and couldn't even believe her husband was pulling a move like that. Cristian decided to be extra, and was out there with some garden shears carving a straight-up masterpiece out of a bush. Later, the Marquis reminded his wife she didn't have to report to him or anything, but she still wanted to spill about the trip. Hillary was not about to let this turn into some secret between her and the crown prince, because that would just be mad awkward. But the Marquis wasn't trying to hear any of it, and the girl just figured he wanted zero deets on anything involving John and Julia. She just went with his wish, obediently calling him Lord Cristian, which totally weirded out the Marquis. And he asked his wife not to call him that, but just by his name, even making it clear she didn't need to. Add the whole Lord thing when she talked to him, even though it was super cringe for her and tough to just call him by his name. She agreed anyway, and even tried to say his name out loud right then and there. But she just kept stuttering. She finally got it out, though her cheeks went completely red. And Cristian was satisfied. Having scored that win, the Marquis went back to trimming the bush. Meanwhile, Hillary wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Then Cristian asked what first prediction she had cooked up for John. The girl hesitated for a sec and then mumbled that His Majesty would totally crash before making a comeback. She knew a similar case where the Emperor, who was perfectly healthy, suddenly just passed out. The cause and the root of the sickness were a total mystery, and Julia was using her healing powers on him daily. That was like the last time the princess could even summon her divine powers. So then the Marquis asked if his wife could save His Majesty with that prediction. The girl made no guarantees, but believed it could totally be prevented. Although it was better to be ready for whatever went down. Cristian thought about how he'd lost his parents young since he and John were both ride or die for the Emperor. To His Majesty, the Marquis was basically like a son, and he absolutely adored him. John was super fond of him too. And he felt like some things were better to run by him first. The Marquis then confessed to his wife that he was also gonna visit the castle, which totally shocked her since they were already on their way to the palace together. Hillary was wondering if it was even a good idea to bring her husband there. She was low-key terrified he might run into Julia. Since the Marquis had barely gotten his footing back, Hillary had no clue what to do if her husband suddenly blacked out. And Cristian clocked her anxiety. And again, the Marquis seemed to read her mind and asked if she was worried that he'd start catching feels for Julia again. The girl tried to protest, but Cristian cut her off and assured her she shouldn't stress about it. He was just going to check the Emperor's status and was hoping to ghost the princess entirely. The Marquise wanted to support her husband and suggested they just play it by ear if he got tired of forcing himself to forget. Hillary also promised she'd stick with him no matter what, just so he wouldn't repeat the absolute train wreck of a future she'd already seen. She begged him to just follow his heart, whether it led to love or straight-up hate, justifying it by saying that in like 2 years, they wouldn't even be a thing anymore. Hillary's whole game was just to get under the princess's skin and make her feel awful. And for Cristian to totally ghost them. So the Marquis suggested they just head home on their own once their business was done, no waiting around for each other. Right then, she started freaking out again, thinking he might just collapse, and she wouldn't even be there for him. But Cristian wasn't that fragile. Besides, he totally knew how to handle it. So in the end, they decided to do their own thing. But Hillary was still bugging out about her husband. She still had to talk to the prince, so she made her way over to him. But then she suddenly froze. The way the Marquis was acting was a total throwback to the original Cristian from the story. Then the girl overheard the servants whispering about some kind of massive party, one that hadn't happened in forever. Hillary crept in closer and heard them mention it was for Princess Julia's get-together. The maids were also gossiping that this time no super young girls were getting an invite, all because the prince was being a hard-ass about it. Now they're planning to invite the young ladies who are in charge of running their families' households. The maids also mentioned Julia's beef with Lady Marian, and that honestly made the Marchioness a little happy. The girl thought everything was unfolding exactly the way she wanted. After listening in a little longer, she headed back to her spot. For John, it was kinda unexpected that the Marchioness decided to meet with him first. The girl felt a little bad about the harsh words. The prince had used to totally kill her vibe. Then he got curious about just how bad this future was that the Marchioness had seen to make her show up so early. Hillary didn't hesitate to drop the bomb that his father, the emperor, would fall soon, and wouldn't even be able to lift a finger. Judging by the prince's expression, it seemed like the news didn't faze him one bit, and he looked crazy handsome at the same time. John noticed that the Marchioness was staring, and he reminded her that it wasn't exactly appropriate since she had her own husband. He even dared to guess that she just liked checking out handsome guys. But now all she could see was that the prince seriously didn't care about her news. She moved in closer and told him straight up that His Majesty the Emperor was going to fall, and soon. John explained why he was so calm about it, saying the doctor hadn't found anything serious in the last checkup. Hillary then added that she didn't know the cause or the exact day it would happen, just that she saw a vision of it in the future. To prevent it, the Marchioness advised keeping someone from the royal inner circle close to the emperor at all times. But even with those precautions, there was no guarantee His Majesty could actually avoid it. Now the prince looked sad because Julia was using her healing powers on the emperor every single night. Hillary remembered that the princess used this miracle every night until His Majesty finally collapsed. But after that, everyone realized that every life has its limits, even with the help of divine powers. Now that Hillary had told the prince everything she came to say, she decided to go find her husband. Suddenly, the royal chamberlain walked into the office, and John ordered him to go to the emperor immediately. He was then thinking of going himself and asking to send his wife, but the Marchioness cut him off. The prince was totally shocked since just moments before Hillary had been the one advising him to send Julia to His Majesty. The girl explained her dude was in a face-to-face with the emperor right now, so she asked if they could dip out first. 'Cause if he bumps into the prince, it's gonna totally mess with his head. So then the manager totally stepped in and announced that Lady Julia had already bounced to go have tea with the emperor, so them the prince and the marquise totally booked it over there right now, 'cause they knew the princess was brewing the tea all by herself. Hillary was way more stressed about her man though. And she really didn't want him bumping into Julia there and then have something sus suddenly happen to him. John guessed the whole feigning thing might have been foul play and asked the marquise what her take was. The girl had no clue what to even say back and just told him to run faster. In the meantime, Julia was already rolling up with the tray of freshly made tea and was super hyped to get to chat with the emperor. She was the one patching him up every night, so she was allowed to see his face, but he'd get so wiped that he would just pass out immediately. But then a few feet ahead, the princess spotted a familiar face standing right next to the emperor. Julia literally froze and almost dropped the entire tray just whispering his name, Cristian. He heard the voice he was trying so hard to ghost and turned around knowing for sure he wasn't just bugging out. A hot minute later, a totally frantic Hillary was right up in the Marquis's face, and he was so ticked off he had literally ordered her not to come there, but she blew him off and showed up with the prince in tow. The Marquise immediately started trying to explain herself, saying she'd been majorly freaking out, asking if he'd already run into the princess yet. The prince just shot a little smirk at his old buddy and totally looked like he was about to say something. But Cristian wasn't giving him the chance. He grabbed his wife by the hand and just yanked her with him to bounce from the room super fast. The girl just went with it, no questions asked. But she was so confused about why he was gripping her hand so tight and not letting go. Still, she didn't even try to pull away, 'cause low-key she liked it when the Marquis was touching her. Behind Hillary, she heard the prince call out to his wife, and it totally clicked what was really going down. John went up to his wife and started demanding answers from her about what just went down, 'cause he could totally see she looked bummed. The princess just watched Cristian walking away, and she couldn't even deal with all the feels she was having right then. The Marquis wasn't super far, and he heard what they were saying, but he didn't turn around, just kept on his path. Hillary watched him and just knew that her husband was trying with everything he had to keep it together, and she was glad he was actually pulling it off. A few minutes later, they were in the carriage, and that's when Hillary finally got the nerve to tell him how impressed she was. But the Marquis just shut that down, saying that girl didn't know the real him at all, and that her predictions couldn't see who people really were. Cristian was just trying to figure out why she pretended to know everything. And Hillary was totally shook, like she had no idea what to even say. She had no choice but to apologize for her completely wild attitude that had hurt her husband. The Marquis didn't say a word to her about it, and the entire ride back to the house was dead silent. Once she was back in her room, Hillary was overthinking why she had acted that way, wondering if it was just so Cristian would finally let his feelings out. And she was bugging out, second-guessing if she should have stopped her husband from going to the palace. On the other hand, who could have known that on that specific day Julia would decide to visit the emperor? Ever since then, the Marquis kept giving her the silent treatment even at home, which totally threw Hillary for a loop. She knew William would take good care of him, while she could just chill out with some wine. But she couldn't shake the feeling, this urge to go and make sure he was okay. Even though she knew it was a bad move. It was such a bummer that Cristian's office was so close, she could literally see it from the balcony. But he still felt so far away. Then she saw him go out on his balcony and lean way over. At first she thought she was imagining it, But then Hillary realized that the Marquis seriously hadn't slept at all, even at this insane hour. And her heart totally dropped. She remembered the notes where Cristian had tried to, end it all again. And she was straight up terrified. She figured that whole thing with Julia must have reopened old wounds, so Hillary immediately took off to save her guy. She couldn't believe a dude that brave would do something like that over some dumb stuff. On the way, she bumped into the freaked out butler, who was basically too scared to bother the Marquis. She was so worked up she could barely talk straight, but she got William to understand she was worried sick about the Marquis's whole situation. He started telling a panicked Hillary that his boss had just gone out on the balcony for some fresh air. When she realized she'd been freaking out for no reason, the girl could finally breathe again. She was convinced she'd just been imagining things. Right away, she started apologizing and tried to duck out of the office before the Marquis even saw she was there. But then she heard his voice. Cristian was actually glad to see her right then, since he'd been wanting to talk to her. Then he asked the butler to give them some space and not to bother them with any nonsense for a while. In that moment, Hillary felt kinda awkward and was mentally praying for William not to leave. But he couldn't just ignore a direct order from his boss, so she was totally ready to just dip out of there. As she was leaving, Hillary even kinda glanced back at the door, cause she was feeling super cringe about how she'd been acting. But then she clocked that the Marquis was being completely chill, and it didn't seem like he was about to call her out or anything. It was the total opposite. He actually got closer to the Marquis and told her he had something he needed to say. The girl turned to face him, having no idea what to say in that moment. All she could do was swallow past the lump in her throat. For a couple of seconds, Cristian just stared totally silent like he was waiting for a sign from the universe or something. But for real, the Marquis was just trying to find the right words. He was feeling kinda guilty about what had gone down earlier that day, and now he was dead set on apologizing to his wife. He also owned up to being way too harsh with her. And in that instant, Hillary was just totally speechless. Her heart was pounding like crazy, but she tried to play it cool and asked how Cristian was feeling now. He explained that he'd crashed for a little bit earlier, and now the Marquis was feeling way better. He also clocked that the girl kept her back to him the whole time, and asked why she wasn't looking at him. That's when it clicked that Hillary had been drinking wine out on the terrace, and he took a couple steps back. Not trying to make it awkward and right, then the girl realized Cristian had totally seen her, and a super messed up idea hit her being out on the balcony. She'd kinda let her guard down. And now she got that the guy had watched her acting all out of pocket. The Marquis called out to his wife again, and she was gearing up to say sorry for not acting like she was supposed to. But when she turned around, she saw Cristian had poured them some wine, and was holding a glass out for a toast with him. Hillary's mind was totally blank. She even thought she might be passed out, and that this whole thing was just a dream. It felt unreal that she was sipping wine with the person she loved super late at night in her room. But still, she knew it was for real, and was trying to play it cool so she didn't look like an even bigger dork in front of the Marquis, but at the same time, she so did not want the night to be over and decided to just soak it all in. Hillary looked over at her husband, who in that moment seemed crazy sweet and hot at the same time. She understood how vulnerable he actually was, and she couldn't lose him. For a split second, she even wished she had her phone to snap a pic of him, then the Marquis. She realized she was thinking about him way too much again, like her whole goal at first was just to save his butt. Cristian peeped that his wife was blushing hardcore, and got kinda worried about her. He even thought she might straight up pass out, so he got closer ready to snap Hillary out of it if he had to. She was desperate to change the vibe in the room, so she wouldn't totally die of embarrassment. So she started grilling the Marquis about the princess. The girl asked how the prince's wife reacted when they ran into each other. The Marquis kinda hesitated before answering, and when she peeped. Hillary didn't push it, but Cristian figured he had nothing left to hide. And he admitted that Julia was totally shook for a sec. That didn't last long though, and after that the princess went right back to acting normal with him. Julia was a little thrown by the surprise meeting, since no one had given her a heads up that the Marquis was gonna show up at the palace. So Cristian let her know that he wasn't there for her, but to meet up with the emperor. The princess then put on this super innocent face and was like, in that case, they should all have tea together. Then Julia turned right to the emperor, wanting to start a more chill conversation, but Cristian, he caught a vibe that was totally freaking him out. And he knew he had to dip, he couldn't stick around there another second, so the Marquis made a beeline for the exit, where he literally slammed into the Marquis at the door. And John, who were also rushing in, Cristian was just completely lost trying to figure out where he'd messed up. Since Julia was acting totally normal with him, same as always, but now it was all clicking for the Marquis. It was crystal clear that everything he'd tried so far had been a total L. Cristian had no clue why everyone was coming for him, or why Hillary didn't show up sooner. When he was totally in his feels, the Marquis was there to listen, but he still didn't get why he'd been so down bad before, or who was even to blame for the drama now. Cristian just kept going, spilling about how he'd basically wasted his life on pointless tries. Hillary then remembered how, in the story, the Marquis was majorly in love with the princess, and had been the happiest dude ever before. All this, she decided to hype him up, telling him he did it all for love. And the Marquis said that for real, none of his moves were for nothing. She was finally getting that Cristian didn't want to keep a mental pic of Julia in his heart. But the actual feelings he'd felt, Hillary also told him not to deny he was capable of catching feelings, since that was his whole key to being happy. Cristian was realizing his heart wasn't made of stone, And because of that, he believed he deserved love too. That whole belief was like his shield keeping him from getting hurt whenever someone totally dissed his whole existence. Hillary was convinced that like a ton of people she barely ever saw were actually for real about her. The Marquise was just confident that everything was going to be all good and was super hyped for their future. Christian totally took that to mean she could see his future or something. But Hillary cleared it up, saying she couldn't just see whatever she wanted. Even so, the girl was ready to do literally whatever it took to make her husband happy. While they were talking as she was comforting her guy, she didn't even realize how hard she was squeezing his hands. Feeling kinda awkward, Hillary immediately let go, and then decided it was time to crash. The second she stood up, Christian suddenly stopped her grabbing her hand like he was about to say something major. But he totally chickened out and let go so she could head to her room. Before she bounced, Hillary paused at the door and wished the Marquis a good night. Once Christian was by himself, he went back to thinking about that weird feeling the girl gave him that was messing with his head. As she walked down the hall, she couldn't stop thinking about how his hand was shaking in hers. That's why Hillary had to dip out of the room. She totally knew that the Marquis was all in his feelings, and that his emotions were a mess, so she had to wait for him to chill out a bit. She was planning on talking to him a little later, but then things just got super wild, so for a while they couldn't even see each other. The girl was trying to get all her stuff done ASAP, but she always ended up grinding super late, like by the time the butler had already crashed for the night. He also peeped that the lady had like 10 new tasks for every single assignment. In the meantime, William was also schooling the Marchioness on how to handle her husband's land, and was giving her a tour of the whole crib too. Plus, the princess's tea party was coming up, and Ilari was back to taking classes with Mrs. Elizabeth, but this didn't really feel like enough to level up her experience. So the Marchioness started hitting up the Countess's social events too, Pamela's that is. And again, it was at night. The poor girl would just faceplant onto her pillow and be super bummed about not seeing her husband at all because of work. She also had to get everything sorted out before the tea party so she'd be ready for whatever might pop off while she was thinking about the tea. It dawned on Hilary that on top of all the prep, she had totally spaced on the most important thing. The very next day. So the girl went to meet up with Mrs. Elizabeth again, who like always was totally hyped to see her. Mrs. E was kinda shook that the Marquise had hit her up for a random meeting out of nowhere. But the situation was like super serious. So she spilled all the tea to her mentor, telling her she had a major fit crisis for the big tea party. Every single tailor was completely booked solid for the same event. And Laurie was really hoping the lady could help a girl out. She started explaining that she was going to the princess's reception, and she absolutely had to have a major glow-up. Then a light bulb went off for the Marquise. So she'd brought something with her and wanted to get Mrs. E's take on it. She basically suggested that she should just remix another dress a little bit, since there was legit no time to have a new one made from scratch. Hilary knew that at this point that was totally the best call. I mean, she'd already had the same idea, and besides, the girl was stressing about all the gossip about her and her background. And she decided to serve them her real self. The Marquise figured that way everyone would be looking at her asterisk, not her social status. Mrs. Elizabeth was low-key thrown by the idea, but she totally caught the deep vibe behind it, and said my bad for ever doubting. Then Hilary reminded her that not too long ago, she wanted to hook her up with a fire tailor. Elizabeth totally started blushing. 'Cause like she was kinda holding something back when she made that promise. She finally called him over, and this dude in some super basic clothes appeared in front of them. Hilary was like, whoa, this guy is huge. She was not expecting to see someone who looked more like a dock worker, or some dude who does manual labor. Elizabeth explained that the guy's name was Jeremy. He was a merc, but for real, he had some mad skills. He was actually low-key famous among all the rich ladies, and his whole thing was upcycling the dresses and jewelry they'd just toss out. He didn't get famous for making pretty clothes, though. It was because he was just on another level, plus, the lady admitted that Jeremy wasn't from a fancy background, and she said sorry for not giving the Marquise a heads up sooner. For Hilary, his social status didn't even matter, as long as his skills were as fire as everyone said. The girl was so stoked that she'd asked the lady for help, who actually respected the culture and regular people. Hilary also loved that Elizabeth valued a real friendship that was way bigger than social status. So then the girl spread the dress she brought with her out on the table, and an epic design had to come out of it. Hilary also brought a bunch of accessories and suggested the tailor work his magic on them before they even got started. Jeremy asked if she had like a favorite style or anything. Then he got into the details like what kind of lace she was into, or ruffles or any embroidery she was feeling, and also what her go-to colors were. But the girl just decided to trust his vision. 'Cause for her, the main thing was just looking totally fire. She just suggested the dress not have like a super sweet vibe, since Julia was gonna be rocking something similar, and asked for something a little more chill. For a sec, Jeremy paused. And then he just shouted that he just dreamed up the perfect design for the Marquise. The dude like immediately snatched his notebook and bolted to start sketching, completely tuning out the girl literally begging him to stay. Hilary was just trying to figure out why he even asked for her opinion, if he was just gonna cook something up that fast anyway. Madame Elizabeth just kinda chuckled as she sat down on the sofa. 'Cause in that moment, she thought the Marquise was actually pretty funny. But she also had mad respect for that girl because she schemed up a way to alter a dress and became an advisor. To the prince for real. The girl was so hyped that she managed to pull all that off, since she did it all just for her man. In the end, madame, just wished that the prince's wife would be as cool and classy as she was. Hearing that, Hillary even thought something shady was going on with the princess, but madame shut that down real quick. She explained that she's just like super nervous, because Countess Pamela started spreading some nasty rumors, and according to all that tea, Julia is supposedly obsessed with the whole social ladder and totally disses the aristocrats because she's a commoner herself, you know, the Marquise. Figured that's why the tea party got so awkward, because of all those rumors flying around. She also decided that people just completely lost their trust in Julia, just like what happens in the original story. But the lady swore that the rumors are all cap, and that the princess totally has the right to be called the mother of the country, and pretty soon everyone's gonna have to accept it. Even Mrs. Elizabeth herself was 100% on the prince's wife's side, since she was her assistant and all. At that moment, Hillary thought that if this was true, then the OG novel was totally derailed, and Julia would get to stay the main character. Their convo got cut short by Jeremy like out of nowhere. He popped up so suddenly it actually freaked them out. He was shouting that his idea for the dress was like a volcano just blowing up in his mind. He designed a look that would be a perfect vibe for the Marquise, matching her style and her age perfectly. And he got so hyped he sketched out a bunch of designs and told the young lady to just pick whichever one she liked the best. Hillary started totally scoping them out, and just from the look on her face, Jeremy could tell she wasn't feeling any of it. He thought his own stuff wasn't just perfect but legit the best out there. And he was like, what's not to love? For a sec he almost lost his cool and was totally about to blow up, but right away, he caught himself and apologized to the girls. But for real though, she felt like all of Jeremy's designs were just way too extra. Way more over the top than any other new dress. Anyone who saw a dress like that would instantly think it was giving major ballroom vibes. Not, let's just have some tea vibes. Still, the girl kept looking through the drawings, and she just felt like something was missing. That's when Jeremy started trying to say they were just some rough drafts that he just doodled to warm up. Then she landed on one option, but the tailor was thinking it might not be the best look for her. But the girl was set on her choice and told him to make that exact dress. Soon after, things at the Marchioness's house went totally wild. Because everyone was jumping in to help Hillary get ready. The maids were even fighting with each other to make sure nothing got missed. Not the perfume, not even the ribbons. And everyone was hustling, making all this noise that was low-key, bugging the Marquis, since they totally woke him up. But the butler came right over to him and spilled the tea that the lady of the house was heading to a tea party with Her Majesty. At the same time, William was really hoping his boss would show even a tiny bit of interest. Because the Marquise was basically doing all this for him. Then he let Cristian know that since they were totally crunched for time, they had to give one of the lady's old dresses a major glow-up. The Marquise was like, wait, why though? Hillary hadn't just asked him for it since he could have totally helped her out with some cash. But the butler had to remind him that his lady had promised not to use his property for her own stuff. And when everything was finally ready to go, the maids could not stop gassing her up about how gorgeous she looked. Their lady's dress turned out legit stunning, and it totally showed off the girl's figure. And Laurie didn't forget to thank the maids for their help, even though they couldn't believe that outfit actually came from an old dress. The girl explained that the killer look was all thanks to this super talented tailor who finished the whole thing super fast. And even he was impressed with his own work, admitting it was legit the best dress he'd ever made, no cap. Not even the Marquise expected it to look that good. Yo, the sketch didn't even do it justice. It looked way better IRL. But for the tea party, the dress just wasn't hitting right, you know? So even with Mrs. Elizabeth there, they tried to talk the Marquise out of wearing it. They were convinced Hillary needed to have her main character moment. Especially more than the princess, that girl was always trying way too hard to have the best drip. But thing is, this was going to be her official debut as a Marquise, and tons of people were going to be seeing her for the first time, so Hillary figured the fit should be classy and not super extra. You know, no unnecessary stuff. But even she had to admit that for a royal tea party, the dress was giving majorly basic vibes. So Hillary went back to the tailor, trying to figure out how to give the dress a major glow-up. He gave her this idea to crush up some pearl shells, and then use the little pieces to totally deck out the dress. When it was all done, the dress looked like it was covered in jewel dust, and whenever she moved, it shimmered like crazy. It looked like it cost a total fortune. The thing is, before she got dropped into this whole romance story, Hillary had totally seen a similar dress in a magazine. That's totally where she got the idea from. But she was still genuinely super thankful to him, because he really poured his heart and soul into making that dress. For the tailor, it was like a massive honor to whip up a dress for the Marchioness, and he was only cool with her coming back to see him while they were chopping it up about it. Cristian just barged into the room out of nowhere. Didn't even knock because the door was open, but still it totally caught his wife and the tailor off guard. Since they were completely zoned in on the dress, Hillary's first thought was that she'd messed up again, because the Marquis had decided to personally roll up on her. Cristian just froze, clocking the dress, which looked nothing like a custom job then, without saying another word. He pulled out a pouch full of gold coins and told his wife to hand it over to the tailor. Jeremy was totally shook, and the Marquis explained he was just dropping off the budget for it. He also told the tailor not to hold back, and dude immediately started thinking about the chance to open his own clothing shop. After that, the Marquis just turned around and bounced from the room without saying anything else while Hillary was trying to process what just went down. The maids also started whispering amongst themselves, not getting why their boss had dipped out so fast. When the lady was such a smoke show, but Hillary didn't find it weird at all, because she knew that to the Marquis, like only one girl was allowed to be the pretty one, and that was Julia. The Marchioness knew the deal from the jump. That's why she got that it wasn't even worth it to get all emo about it. But then all of a sudden the Marquis, who was basically already out the door, spun around and walked back over to his wife. He actually looked at her this time and was kinda nice about it. And then he admitted her dress was actually on point. The girl was shook, she had no idea what to even say back. 'Cause on one hand, she was low-key hyped that he'd even paid any attention to her fit. But at the same time, she remembered that Julia still had his whole heart for real, and that he thought she was the one who was super adorable. Christian, for his part, just told the Marchioness to have a good time or whatever. And then he bounced, heading for the door again. The girl knew she shouldn't get her hopes up, 'cause the Marquis had just tossed her some random compliment on his way out. Even though it made her feel kinda weird, she more than anyone knew that to him Princess Julia was the main character. She glanced at the coin purse and convinced herself that one simple compliment from her husband was good enough. Ever since Hillary got to this estate, this was the first time Christian had actually come to see her on his own. Back then, he just played off his visit saying he just brought the allowance money and that was it. But even so, the girl couldn't just let things slide and just totally drop it. The second he stepped out of the room, Hillary yelled after him, shouting a thank you for coming to cheer her up. He gave her a nod of approval, and the butler was even low-key, glad that his boss had actually paid attention to his wife. William, though, followed him to the study and asked why he bounced so fast. But Christian explained that the Marchioness was just an excuse, and that he basically just wanted to make sure the dress he tweaked wouldn't wreck his reputation. The Marquis thought about it, wondering if he even believed his own story, because now his feelings were kinda different. He kept replaying the image of his wife in his head, picturing this young, super charming and cheerful girl who was helping him with a totally pure heart. A little while later, Hillary rolled up to the palace and her vibe was pretty good. The first of the high society people the girl met was the Countess Pamela, who gave her a polite, "What's up?" Right away, the girl started asking her how she looked, confessing she was kinda bugging out. The Countess calmed her down, telling her everything was totally fine, and that today, just like she promised, she was gonna be the Marquis's ride or die. But Pamela, though, spilled that she was low-key not cool with it and was feeling kinda sketchy about the whole plan. So then they headed over to the salon where the tea was going down, which was in the Emperor's main crib, and that's the tea. It's 'cause he saw the Emperor's downfall was basically a done deal, so John decided it was a good look to get in tight with Julia. The girl wasn't even expecting the prince to be so open with her, but the Countess reminded her they had to stick to the script. Then Hillary added that if Pamela was bugging out, she'd take care of literally everything, and she just had to trust the process. The Countess, after a while, started thinking that the Marquise was like a super unique vibe, and just her being there was super chill. Hillary was totally vibing with the compliment that came straight from the Countess herself, and gave her this super sly thank you. Meanwhile, back in the salon, everyone else was starting to roll in, all the bougie aristocrats invited to the tea party. Once the whole crew was assembled, the Crown Prince's actual wife joined them, Princess Julia. Everyone totally bowed down to her, while Hillary was thinking that the whole mess with Christian from this morning was actually a pretty solid start. The girl decided today was the perfect day to really put on a show. The main character's true colors. So the princess in the meantime started her whole speech, saying how she was super happy to see everyone, and hoped they'd all have a killer time. Instantly, all the guests started shouting out good luck to the Imperial fam, and thanking them for the invites. As soon as Julia rolled up, they announced the party had officially started, and they put Hillary in a seat right next to her. The Marquise at first thought it was just 'cause of her rank, but she also decided that this spot could be pretty clutch. Meanwhile, the other rich girls were totally bugging out about having the party right there in the Imperial Palace. A lot of them figured it was all thanks to Her Majesty's good vibes, and were convinced she was a fan of all of them. Hillary, though, was just watching everyone party, including the princess, and she just couldn't get how she was acting this way. Not after that whole prophecy. The girl thought maybe it was just the vibe of the place, but except for her own crew, how nice everyone else was being was seriously ticking her off. Julia, on the other hand, seemed to be everyone's favorite, which was also kinda getting to the Marquise. When she read the novel, the princess was not nice at all. She was a super cold and distant character. The Marquise kept trying to make eye contact with Julia, but she seemed to be totally avoiding looking at her. Hillary, on the other hand, was trying to figure out what the princess was really feeling, and how messed up she was about it. In that moment, a maid pushed a cart with some snacks into the room and rolled it straight up to the princess. Julia decided to flex that she herself had made the appetizers and was telling everyone to try them. When the Marquise heard this, she felt kinda grossed out and totally lost her appetite, since she knew all about her cooking skills or lack thereof. But when the tray was uncovered, Hillary saw that the snacks didn't look anything like something someone would actually make themselves. The little frosted cookies and pieces of cake looked exactly like the ones the Marquise could have bought herself even without being rich. Meanwhile, the princess looked super happy with herself, since she'd set it all up to be super high-end. With this, she was also trying to send a message basically throwing shade at the luxuries of the aristocrats. Now Hillary got that the main character of that novel had always had it easy, like walking on a path of flowers, totally shielded from any problems. And whatever she did, people would just hype her up. At least that's how it was in the novel she'd read. But in this reality that Hillary was in, the princess was like super stuck up. And she was totally proud of it too. But still she offered her guests this tea that she claimed smelled like completely unreal. That's when the Marchioness threw shade, saying Julia had prepped all this stuff just so she wouldn't forget her humble roots. Then she gave a curious look to the other ladies and asked if they were on the same page. Hillary also fessed up that for her those snacks were definitely a total throwback, even if they seemed kinda basic to other people. Meanwhile, the young lady kept watching the others munching on cookies and cakes. Then she hit the princess up with a question, asking how her whole situation with Mrs. Marion was going, and if some drama had gone down. Julia was clueless about why the Marchioness would even bring that up. And she explained that you couldn't even tell she'd had a hand in it, plus Hillary added that everyone was already clued in, from all the gossip from the maids, that everything was made just how she wanted, but still Mrs. Marion was a total no-show during the tea, and Hillary had a gut feeling that wasn't just a coincidence. The Marchioness wasn't sure if the lady herself had decided to just bail, or if the princess made her. But the real tea was that Julia was having beef with the imperial maid, and Hillary knew it. I couldn't just pass up the chance to show it off to everyone. The princess clapped back, saying she was the crown prince's wife, you know, the heir, and that she had to be a role model for literally everyone in the country. Like if her maids had helped her out, it would have just seemed like some basic tea party. That's why she decided to do it her way. And what's more, she even prepped these snacks herself, hoping the guests would actually give them a try, and really wishing they'd be into them. Then the princess said she was hoping that her whole vibe would be a good example for everyone. The Marquise replied, sharing that she also hoped everyone would get the super deep meaning behind what Her Highness was doing. The princess totally melted hearing that, thinking Hillary finally got her whole intention. Then Julia made a comment about the Marquise's dress, and suggested she dress more on point next time. Hillary totally took that as the princess throwing major shade at her dress, the one she had worked so hard on. But seeing how chill Julia was, she thought maybe she should just ignore it. But still, because of the whole vibe that was created, she wanted to express how bad she felt, since usually those kinds of dresses are decked out with pricey jewels. And maybe Julia saw the Marquise's outfit as her being way too extra, and yet her own dresses were totally magnificent. Were made with the most top-tier fabrics, and Hillary legit had no clue why she was catching all this shade. At one point, the Marquise was totally shook, but she was trying to play it cool. The Countess, who was sitting right there with her, shot the girl the signal they had planned out before. It was the go-ahead for the Marquise to basically go off and say whatever was on her mind, and Pamela would totally have her back at the perfect moment. She could barely even believe that the Countess had actually agreed to something like that, and she was totally stoked. For Hillary, having the Countess on her team was a huge hype-up. And the Marquise got ready to spill. She stood up and explained to the princess that there was like a total mix-up. A little awkwardly, she admitted that her dress was actually an upcycled piece from one of her all-time favorite outfits, and it sparkled because she'd covered it with bits of seashells. That's why it looked like it was covered in some kind of bling. Now the princess was the one who was low-key, shook finding out that the Marquise showed up to tea in a dress she'd altered herself. But like at the same time, she realized that it actually looked totally gorgeous, and the shells gave it this awesome, unique vibe. Then some other high society girl went over to the Marquise with her bestie and admitted she literally couldn't take her eyes off the dress. She also fessed up that she never would have guessed that some tailor could give an old dress that much of a glow-up. So then the rich girl got brave enough to ask who this tailor even was. The Marquise said his name was Jeremiah, but then she kinda clocked from their outfits that they wouldn't know him. Still, she had to spell it out for them that they probably didn't know him because he was just a commoner. The girls were totally shook hearing that a commoner could actually design a dress that fire. But they also kind of figured he could have pulled it off, you know, since regular people are used to upcycling their fits. Hillary realized that these aristocrats were always going to be flexing about their family status. In that moment, the Duchess herself also peeped how gorgeous that dress was. She'd never in a million years have guessed it was made by some regular person. Pamela chimed in that she was low-key, starting to think the culture and the skills of regular folks were way better than she ever thought. So the Duchess decided right then and there she wanted to hit up the Marquise to get a dress made for her like ASAP. Word started spreading through the whole ballroom that if the Duchess was co-signing it, then a ton of other people would be totally down to get their old dresses remade too, to ditch it. And that's when the princess decided to just come clean that she was even feeling super cringy about her dress, the one she paid a crazy amount for. So now the Marquis was giving Julia this super smug look, realizing her plan was totally working. The princess honestly looked in that moment like someone who was about to have a total meltdown. Hillary knew for a fact that the prince's wife did not want that kind of drama happening at our get-together. Julia's whole plan was to just have desserts for everyone, even if they weren't all that fancy. But she probably should have just hired a chef, a regular one, and tried to be a little more budget-conscious. Besides, she would have just upgraded some regular people food to be more fancy and aristocratic, and it totally would have been a hit. The Duchess basically figured that the Marquis could have made a beautiful dress without needing to alter it or use all those shells. Then she kinda hinted that Marquis Cristian just doesn't give his wife a very big budget to work with. After those words were out, Hillary had this look of being genuinely confused since it sounded like a straight-up backstab. The girl just stood there next to the table, completely silent for a few seconds. While totally picturing what was about to go down, the Countess just played all humble and looked down, acting like she was super embarrassed by her own words. But for real though, Hillary was low-key loving that their conversation had finally gotten to this point. 'Cause she and Pamela had schemed it all out beforehand to casually steer the whole convo over to Cristian. All the other bougie girls who were chilling by their table decided to dip, wanting absolutely no part of that drama. A little later, Pamela put on this totally embarrassed face, like she'd asked the Marchioness something completely out of line. But Hillary, who was trying so hard not to look totally hyped, just gave the Countess this super sweet smile, telling her it was totally NBD. So then the Marchioness announced with like this major air of dignity that her man personally took care of her, which by the way was totally weirding out the princess. Hillary kept going, spilling that the Marquis Cristian had like ultimate respect for her as his wife. The whole time the girl kept side-eyeing Julia, and you could totally tell the whole chat was getting to her. Then Hillary added that she had mad respect for her super smart and awesome husband, even though he's a pretty intense dude. After that, the Countess mentioned that the Crown Prince had been totally throwing shade about how cold the Marquis was. So when the princess heard that, she kinda snapped out of it like she was waking up from some crazy dream, and decided she had to jump in. She was about to explain why John was acting like that, but the Marchioness completely cut her off. She reminded her it was all because of some old drama. Then Hillary too started going on about how she was 100% sure her husband did the right thing. Julia looked super confused all over again, and the Marchioness totally clocked it. So she decided to stir the pot even more. Hillary asked her why she thought the Marquis Cristian had actually done something wrong. In that moment, the girl was referring to that whole incident where her husband slipped poison to the Duke, Oliver, and his daughter. Yeah, the Marquis made them drink the poisoned tea, but his main motivation was really Julia and John though. But besides that, Cristian had his own personal reasons to handle that mess himself. The Duke's family, Oliver's whole crew were like your textbook evil villains from a story. They were just doing shady stuff for their own benefit, like snatching kids, trafficking them, and would straight up take out anyone who crossed them. For real, those people were on another level of messed up. They were low-key hiring mercs to take out the throne, which the Marquis was like a total no-go. So then Cristian told John that he had a ton of proof on all the shady stuff they'd done, and he was convinced it was their one shot to totally wreck them. But even though the prince thought going it alone was super risky, the Marquis was also claiming that if the royal family made even one wrong move, they could hit back hard. On top of that, Cristian kept saying he was John's bestie, but that he was ride or die for the imperial family first. That's why every single thing he was about to do was a must for the empire, the emperor, his whole family, and for Julia too. The princess remembered those days like they were yesterday. But right now, she had no clue what the Marquis was getting at. So then Hillary broke it down, saying that if the Marquis hadn't pulled that move, the Duke would have totally rebelled by now. And in the meantime, all the people who are just living their lives in peace could have been completely wasted in the civil war that would have followed. But the princess argued back that the end result shouldn't make the messed up methods okay, and that what Cristian did was just a horrible thing. Julia was firm that in the empire there are actual laws you have to follow. Like everyone had to fall in line, even the Marquis for real. Hillary was like, so if we're all about the law, how come her husband got away with all his shady stuff? For a sec, Julia was just like dead silent, and the Marchioness totally froze up too, waiting for her to drop the perfect comeback. Cause if Julia agreed with her point, her whole position of power would be totally wrecked, which she only got cause of the Marquis. But if she decided to deny it, she'd look so sus for coming after Cristian, who was like 100% innocent. So either way, no matter what she said, the princess was about to get put on blast for being a hypocrite. Julia just looked down, trying to figure it out, totally clueless on how to play a situation like this. That's when the Countess stepped in and basically told the Marchioness to just drop the whole conversation. Even though Pamela got that she was just looking out for her husband, she thought Hillary was coming off a little harsh, which could totally tick off her highness. The princess was shook that the Countess had her back like that, and was low-key hoping for a good outcome. Hillary didn't fight back, and simply asked for the prince's wife to forgive her for being so extra. She also begged the princess to go easy on her for her spicy comments, cause she was just bugging about her husband. The girl threw in that she got a little heated, since it was her first time at a rager like this, and asked if she could bounce to get some air. As she left, the Marquise was like, it's all going according to plan. She had totally handled Julia, and the Countess backed her up afterward. Once she got outside, Hillary found a comfy bench and just sat down to chill for a sec. Right as the tea party was about to wrap up, she'd been dying to totally drench the princess with some cold cider, just like what happened in that book she read. So the Marquise started mumbling this to herself when all of a sudden the Crown Prince rolled up on her. He noticed that Hillary was all alone and looked like she was stressing about something, so he decided to walk over and ask her what was good. Him showing up totally caught the Marquise off guard, and she panicked, thinking he might have heard her talking to herself. But he wasn't giving off any vibes like he heard anything. He just kept standing there looking all confident. Right next to her, just waiting for her to say something, Hillary was like, Where do I even start? And all these wild thoughts started racing through her mind that lasted for like a hot second. And then John leaned over her with this look on his face, like he was about to totally grill her. She got kinda uncomfortable with him all up in her space, so she kinda leaned back, like as far back as the chair would let him. That's when John finally couldn't keep quiet anymore, and asked why she didn't even say hey when she came over. He even suggested that because of her freaky powers, she was starting to get a major ego. Hillary decided not to argue and just apologized, but he was basically like, it's way too late for that. Then John got all curious about why she was there by herself, while the princess was having her tea party. The crown prince had a hunch that between them something had probably gone down, since he knew his wife's whole vibe. In return, Hillary decided to hit him with a question of her own, and asked him what he was doing there. He explained that he was heading to the tea room when he heard some real deep sighs and came over to see what was wrong. The girl realized he had decided to back Julia up, just because that's his wife. And he wasn't even trying to be low-key about it. Still, Hillary admitted she was disrespectful to the princess and had to step out for some fresh air. John was super interested in what she'd said to his wife, to cause all that drama. The Marquise explained that she wanted to stand up for her husband's rep and accidentally shaded the princess while doing it. The prince started to catch on that Hillary was using Cristian to get at Julia, without being direct about it. That totally bugged him, but the young lady explained the whole reason. She'd been talking to the princess about her husband. The reason was the same one the crown prince was grilling her about now. John thought for a second, and then just figured the Marchioness is just like super in love with her husband. While trying to figure out what to say, the Marchioness looked away completely clueless that Cristian was right there near them. A few hours before that, when Hillary bounced from the tea party, a letter showed up at the Marchioness's house. It was a message from the Emperor asking her to visit the Imperial Palace whenever. Like, even if it was that day, His Majesty wanted to sort out the whole issue with the ownership rights for the lands that Hillary had managed to get back. Cristian was thinking about how he hadn't even had a real talk with the Emperor yet. But he was dreading running into Julia again. These thoughts were totally messing with his head. And the butler seeing this got worried about his boss. William at first thought the Marquis wasn't feeling well and decided to call a doctor for him. Meanwhile, the Marquis was just hoping that the princess wouldn't be at the Lion Palace since she was out for tea anyway. His wife's words begging him to show up and have her back were totally living rent-free in his head. So after mulling it over a bit more, the Marquis was like, screw it, and decided to hit up the Lion Palace anyway. And then like a little later, Cristian was already standing in front of the throne where Emperor Dominic was chilling, and the Emperor laid out why he'd called the Marquis over that day. 'Cause for real, he wanted to talk about his wife, and it seemed like a good time now, since before they'd only ever dealt with super urgent stuff. Cristian got the hint that the territories were just an excuse and that Dominic was actually super curious why he'd gotten married in such a rush, and the Emperor even threw some shade about how it all went down so fast, that he didn't even give him a heads up. Cristian couldn't just straight up admit it was because of the prince and princess, so he kinda talked up the Marquise's skills a little. Plus the Marquise explained that Hillary genuinely and for real cared about him and he just couldn't turn her down. Dominic listened to him and got that this girl was actually in love with her husband. Hearing the stuff about love made Cristian start thinking again for a sec. Thinking about how Hillary would call him her treasure. He still couldn't figure out what made him catch feelings for someone he'd never even met. Besides, the Marquis still had no clue what was pushing him to always have her back. Thinking back on everything the Marquis had done, Cristian realized that this was the real deal. After his chat with His Majesty, the Marquis headed back the same way he came when he heard the Crown Prince's voice. He thought it was kinda sus, since he also heard his wife's voice. So he got a little closer to get the tea. Cristian had no idea why Hillary, who was supposed to be at tea right then, was even there. Then he heard John ask why she was so into the Marquis, if she'd literally never met him before. The girl totally blushed a little, 'cause she didn't know what to tell the prince, or how to make it sound legit. But then she decided to flip the script, and she started explaining that it would take her at least a whole week to list all the reasons. She started to list them off, like how gorgeous Cristian's eyes and hair were. She especially went in on describing his hair too. Hillary started gushing about all the Marquis's qualities, saying they were so good they were basically unreal for a person. Then she explained how her husband had like a super strong heart on top of being able to do a ton of stuff. All of that started to make the prince totally zone out, so he asked the Marchioness to just drop it. Even though she was already totally on a roll at that exact moment, Cristian, who was hiding out behind a tall bush, realized it wasn't so much about figuring out all the reasons she loved him, but after thinking for a sec, the Marquis just knew that this girl was like seriously in love with him. The prince insisted that she needed to stop, and then they went back to have some tea since he wanted to keep a personal eye on Julia. After the celebration, when the Marchioness was about to dip, she thought she would ask Pamela for the tea on what the public thought of the princess. Anyway, her original plan was working out perfectly. And then out of nowhere, Hillary spotted the carriage Cristian was in. He saw his wife too, and decided to roll up on her right away and ask what she was up to. The Marquis explained that he'd just come from a meeting with the Emperor, and after that, he chose to wait for Hillary so they could head home together. On top of that, Cristian called her by her name in this super sweet way, which kinda threw the young woman for a loop, 'cause he'd never done that before. The Marchioness was totally living for this situation, since it was basically the highlight of her day. But she knew she had to play it cool. The girl, like never in a million years, thought the Marquis would actually use a sweet nickname for her. The second she heard it, her heart totally pounded out of her chest, and her legs felt like jelly, but she tried her best not to freak out. Plus, she was hella curious why he decided to call her that, and also like wait around to take her home together. When the carriage driver offered her a hand to get into the carriage, he noticed she was shaking and just figured she was wiped out, but the girl just played it off, telling him everything was fine, and that she was totally ready to bounce before hopping in. Then all of a sudden it hit Hillary. She realized she'd never even told Cristian that the tea party was going to be at the main palace. Now she had no clue how he'd guessed where to wait for her, but she decided not to ask him. Meanwhile, the Marquis was wondering why this girl wasn't asking for his help if she was really into him. When they got back to the mansion, Cristian was already holding out his hand for his wife to help her out of the carriage. The girl made a little joke about how it wasn't her birthday or anything for him to be giving her so much attention, but the Marquis didn't really get the hint. It felt a little awkward for her to be leaning on his hand like that, even though she was also low-key loving it as he offered his hand to his wife. Hillary politely thanked him for being so attentive and looking out for her, and in that moment when the Marquise looked at him, she was like, he was so ridiculously charming and attractive. That night the girl was on cloud 9, and that feeling totally had her buzzing from then on. Hillary's memory of what happened after that is like a total blur. She didn't even notice how she ended up back in her room. She also had zero memory of even having dinner, or how the maids helped her get out of her outfit. The girl couldn't believe she was feeling this happy. It was wild, especially since she was only putting in all this effort for Cristian, not for herself. Before heading back from tea, the Marquise had this whole plan to get her journal straight and map out her next moves. But now Hillary was totally not in the headspace for that. She was loving this vibe and decided to just write it out and go to sleep. She couldn't even remember ever being this happy before in the entire time she's been in this whole story. But also she wanted more than anything for Cristian to be happy and for his haters to have to get on their knees before him. Meanwhile, back at the palace, the princess was replaying that moment from the tea party where Hillary had brought up the Marquise. She told herself that she had been majorly wrong, and the prince could totally tell something was up with her. John noticed that after the party, his wife had gotten super quiet and seemed kinda bummed out, but he had no clue what he could have possibly done wrong then. Julia admitted that the Marquise was wondering why her husband hadn't faced any consequences by the country's laws. The prince also remembered what Hillary said about how she just wanted to clear her husband's name. But even with all that, the princess was 100% sure that Cristian was way out of line back then. But she couldn't clap back at the Marquise, and Julia just didn't get it. Why didn't she call out the Marquise before? And now it felt like Hillary was totally throwing shade at her. The prince decided to have his wife's back, explaining that you can't just go around judging everyone by the same moral code. Cristian back in the day made a huge move for Julia and the whole Imperia. But she didn't call him out on it right away. That basically meant that over time she could totally flip the script and make things right again. After that, the three of them could be a squad again, just like old times. But something was still messing with the vibe. Because his ego was getting in the way, Prince John lost his one and only ride or die, the dude who'd been with him his whole life. Now he was just standing there in front of his wife, totally quiet. He was feeling super guilty about the whole situation. Julia noticed he was blushing and couldn't figure out why he was acting so weird. And honestly, it made the princess kinda sad too. She was really hoping John would just reassure her. So she totally made the right call then. Then the prince looked up and pitched an idea to his wife. He thought they should squash their beef with Cristian. He explained that they for real owed the Marquise, and reminded her how she was basically ready to die for him. John also brought up how they all used to be tight, and said she couldn't just act all cold and ghost him now. But Julia clapped back that she's lived her whole life as a real one, like a total saint, never bailing on what she believes in. So now she couldn't even wrap her head around what her life would be like if she decided to forgive Cristian. The prince saw that this whole thing was a major bummer for her, so he decided to take back his suggestion right away. He didn't want to see the princess cry, and told her to just forget everything he had just said. Julia had no idea what to even say back to her husband. It felt like there was a huge lump stuck in her throat. A few days later, the butler hit up Hillary. He gave her a heads up that 2 letters had come for her. He also broke it down for her, saying one was from Mrs. Elizabeth's salon, and the other was from His Highness the Crown Prince. The Marquise was shook when she saw it, wondering why the prince was even writing her. 'Cause it's not like there was some event coming up. In the letter, John let her know that he was clued in on what she pulled at the tea party with the princess. He also got that there was no point in asking her about it, since she'd already owned up to being shady with him. John was hoping she would go to the princess and apologize ASAP. The girl got super ticked off and just crumpled it up without thinking. William peeped that his boss was looking totally shook, but he wasn't about to ask and get on her bad side. Hillary had no clue why the prince would ask her for something like that. 'Cause the afternoon snack session had ended with a super chill vibe. Plus, the girl was pretty sure that after all that, rumors would start flying about her beef with the princess. The tea would be that the crown prince's wife still straight up despises the aristocrat Hillary. She had put in so much work trying to get people to stop hating on Julia. And even though she thought it'd be better to just ghost all those rumors and whatever the prince wanted, She knew that if she didn't play along, she could get totally canceled for dissing the imperial family. On top of that, the Marchioness had a boatload of other stuff to do. But she decided to ask for a face-to-face with the princess. It is what it is. The butler saw the complete mess the Marchioness was in, and he was high-key dying to know what was in that letter. William wanted to offer his boss a hand. He knew that like any little detail could be a game-changer. But he decided not to bum her out even more, and, remembering she hadn't had a single thing to drink all day, he offered to whip up some killer coffee for her. The butler legit sprinted to make the Marchioness a drink, not even listening to Hillary begging him. Not to do it, he was just super quick on his feet and managed to bounce from the room. Before his boss even realized she was all alone, she didn't call him back and just figured that while he was gone she'd wait. She'd read the letter from Madame Elizabeth the Marquise. She started getting locked in on the words on the paper, and it was talking about some kind of lesson, which kinda threw Hillary for a loop. Meanwhile, William had already whipped up the drink and was just about to take it to his boss lady. But then, right in his way, another maid just popped up, who was insisting that bringing hot drinks to the Marquise was her gig. The butler still wanted to bring the tray to Hillary himself, but the maid totally wasn't having it. Right at that moment, while they were beefing, the Marquise blasted right past the two of them, nearly knocking them to the ground. The two servants immediately looked at her and asked why she was in such a huge rush without even getting her coffee. Hillary had zero time to explain anything, so she just asked them to please just leave the drink in her room. Then she took off running again, leaving the servants behind, just guessing what the big emergency could be. Meanwhile, the Marquis was in the middle of sketching when Hillary literally launched herself into his room. He was also super confused about why his wife didn't just enter like she normally would, but instead burst in looking totally freaked out. The girl literally just froze in place, because the way he held the paintbrush just looked so crazy beautiful, but her whole daydream got totally interrupted by Cristian. He was all pushy asking her what went down with his wife. The girl was actually really invested in why he was asking. Because in the letter, the lady mentioned that the temple had started to totally trash talk the Marquise like super publicly. The letter basically said that according to the temple, this girl was just blinded by the bag. She had like zero humanity. Hillary figured out they were trying to put her on blast in public, because they weren't brave enough to face her head on. She also realized that if the nobles started beef with Julia, the prince and the temple totally had her back. So the Marquise started digging through her memories, looking for something that could deal a massive blow to the temple. The temple's OG purpose in this world was to heal the regular folks who couldn't afford those fancy doctors. Doctors were super expensive, and they basically only worked for the royal family, or the super rich people. The fact that Julia even existed, and could use that divine healing power, made the temple's position even stronger. Now Hillary, she was thinking it'd be so clutch if she could just keep people from hitting up the temple, and then an idea hit her. She figured people would totally stop going to the temple if they just weren't getting sick. 'Cause like if you're not sick, there's literally no reason to go. The Marchioness thought this idea was absolutely fire, so she went to go chat with her husband about some personal hygiene strats. At first, Cristian was super confused and didn't get what his wife was on about. His wife broke it down, saying that this was how they could prevent a whole bunch of sicknesses. The very first thing she pitched was giving the common people a chance to wash their hands with actual soap, which was a total luxury item, and basically only available to the bourgeois aristocrats. The young lady suggested that they should just skip adding essential oils to the soap. That way they could sell it for a way lower price. This was the Marchioness's big brain plan to help out the regular folks, though she knew it was going to take a hot minute to get everything prepped for it. It was totally necessary to get a crew of artisans who actually knew how to make soap, and then start up a factory. After listening to his wife, the Marquis kinda thought she just wanted to open some basic soap factory. But that wasn't exactly the vibe Hillary was going for. She cleared it up right away, telling the Marquis that he didn't need to stress about a single thing, 'cause she was gonna handle everything. She knew that her husband's name would basically follow her everywhere she went. That's why she went to ask for his permission to act on his behalf. Then, trying to be all chill about it, the girl added that for this whole project, they were also gonna need some major cash, but the Marquis said that wouldn't even be a problem, 'cause there was already a workshop on the freed-up land. Hillary was low-key intrigued, and she figured he might offer it to her later on. Cristian then suggested to his wife that they go together and really check it out. The girl could hardly believe the Marquis was offering it to her himself for real. She even asked him again just to make sure she wasn't tripping. She totally froze for a sec and needed a few seconds to get it together. Cristian noticed his wife's vibe was off and wanted to help her out, but she just asked for a minute. She seriously needed to catch her breath. So she went back to the room and hid behind the door and just kept whispering that her man had actually offered it to her. It was like her own little prayer or something. She was also really hoping that because he suggested it, it meant he was feeling a whole lot better. Hillary was so down to get out of the palace with him, and she was trying to imagine how it would all play out, but Cristian totally broke his train of thought by getting worried and coming over to check on her. For a sec, he even thought the Marquise wasn't down to go with him and made it clear that she totally didn't have to, But she shot that down and was like she'd love to go with him. She just didn't want to get in his way. Hillary wanted her husband to be comfortable and figured she could just go check out the workshop by herself then. Cristian then added that word on the street was that he was supposedly super sick, especially with how fast they got married out of nowhere. Now the gossip was that since the lady of the house was handling all the business at home, the Marquis was for real in bad health. Cristian figured that if he started showing his face in crowded places, all those rumors would die down real quick. In that moment, Hillary felt like she wasn't handling things right at all, but her husband jumped in right away and added something. He knew she was crushing it with all the internal affairs, and that the people living there were super grateful. Then the Marquis threw in his own thanks too, for all the hard work she was putting in for him. Hearing those words from Cristian to Hillary, every last bit of her worry just instantly vanished. Like it was never even a thing. Then she told him how thankful she was and insisted that all those rumors were just complete. Not to mention all the tea, she figured they'd meet a ton of people on the trip, and she was kind of stressed that the Marquis would have a hard time. Facing all his old baggage, Cristian was totally set on the trip though, so the Marchioness decided it was a must to pack a first aid kit. The girl's whole vibe was low-key giving him flashbacks to how he used to be, and he got that he had to match her energy. So when Hillary finally finished her whole speech, Cristian hit her with, "Let's do the trip next week." And that's when she remembered she had to meet up with Julia to apologize. Now she had a super tough call to make, but the trip with Cristian felt like a way bigger deal, even though on the flip side, if she chose the trip it would mean she had totally ghosted what the prince said. So then Cristian, as if he was literally reading her mind, suggested they could bounce later if she had some urgent stuff to deal with. But Hillary did not want to postpone this trip, and promised she'd wrap up her business like super quick, and before you knew it, the Marchioness was already on her way to the palace to meet up with the princess, who was totally not expecting to see her that early. Julia was even kind of shocked at how fast Hillary wanted to link up, and she confessed that her conscience was totally bugging her. The Marquise was still stoked that the princess was down to see her, but for real though, the girl had a whole other plan in mind. Hillary started by saying she was super sorry that the crown prince's wife was so disappointed in her, and also promised she'd hit up the temple ASAP to repent and really think about all the messed up stuff she'd done. Julia listened to the Marquise, who sounded like she was being totally for real, and she totally bought what she was saying. Hillary then remembered she had to get back, like ASAP, and rushed to say bye. But the princess wasn't about to let her dip just yet, and asked her to stick around. Julia brought up that prophecy about His Majesty being in big trouble soon, and asked if she had seen anything else. Hillary was totally thrown off, cause this one thought just hit her that something really bad had happened. Then the princess admitted that the night before the emperor got super dizzy and totally passed out. Julia, who was there at the time, immediately used her healing skills on him. And Hillary thought that if like a major crisis was avoided. So yeah, she didn't even need to ask for a vision. But the second the Marquise looked at the princess, she got the vibe that her powers were already starting to act up. Julia immediately clapped back, swearing that with her divine gift, everything was totally fine. But you could totally tell from her face she was hiding something. And Hillary knew that as a saint, she was getting weaker by the day. The only difference this time was that Julia actually started to do something right away when the emperor started feeling bad. But the thing is, the Marquise knew his body wasn't like completely healed. And now Julia was hitting her up for advice. The Marquise immediately started to apologize, saying she totally didn't mean to throw shade on the princess's abilities or anything. It's just that she'd had a vision recently. Hillary admitted that this whole thing was a huge deal, and that like at first she thought she should spill the tea to the crown prince about it. But since the princess is involved in all this too, now the Marquise figured she had to talk to her first. So then Hillary dropped a major truth bomb on the princess. That in less than 2 years, her divine power would just disappear. The second Julia heard that, she went ghost white and literally couldn't breathe for a sec. Cause that was like the one thing she cared about most. The princess just couldn't believe it. I mean, she was so sure that power was like given to her. A gift from God, but Hillary swore she was just spilling exactly what she saw, no cap. She wasn't exaggerating at all. The Marchioness added that her whole future-seeing power was also a total gift from God, and that it freaks her out too. Then Hillary brought up how her gift was proven legit when she talked about the border zone. Meanwhile, in her head, the Marchioness was just psyched that the princess would finally have to admit she wasn't some saint anymore. After that, the girl got this super embarrassed look on her face, and confessed that seeing it made her feel awful. Now Hillary couldn't even find the right words to spill everything to the prince. Juliana was actually pretty shook by it, but the Marchioness was like the prince totally shouldn't be kept in the dark. So then the princess started begging Hillary to keep it on the down low for now, and promised she'd tell her husband herself. Juliana kept insisting, cause it was about her whole identity, so she had to be the one to do it. Hillary saw some legit fear in the princess's eyes, and realized she was ready to bolt just like last time. The Marchioness decided to give in to her request, and promised to keep her mouth shut, especially since she saw how desperate she was. Then Hillary decided to give the prince's wife some advice on how to keep it on the DL for as long as possible. The Marquise slid up and whispered something in her ear, then she was like, "Gotta dip," and just bounced. Till now, Juliana's answers had been totally solid, And this time she couldn't chicken out either about spilling all the tea to the prince. Now about Hillary. She was wondering if they could get through this drama together, and how the princess would be feeling after all of it. The girl who'd always been such a goody two-shoes, but was also just a normal girl with this crazy healing power, before she thought the Holy Father might totally freak out. Cause she had like zero clout with her normal background, but then the prince and Christian swore that her gifts were a huge deal, and that God totally chose her for a reason. The Marquise kept insisting that Juliana was like extra special, which totally hyped her up to keep going. People started rolling up to her to get healed, and they were legit so grateful, even praying for her a little while later in return. Julia ended up becoming the crown prince's wife, and her life completely flipped after that. At the time, she had no clue what was coming for her, and was just hoping her life would be like super happy. The prince himself literally chose her to be his wife, and on top of that, he was seriously into her powers now. Julia couldn't wrap her head around God just ghosting her and her losing her gift and all that. The princess tried to just chill, thinking everything would be chill since she was the wife of the crown prince of this empire. Meanwhile, the Marquise was already back home, and the next day they bounced on their trip with Christian. The Marquise could tell his wife was stressing about something, but the girl just went back to staring at her husband, even though she remembered that because of this trip, the house was a total wreck, since she'd tried to pack literally everything she could possibly need. Plus, the girl was totally hyped that she'd managed to pull a fast one on the princess. And now on the road, Hillary realized that with all those thoughts, she probably seemed super on edge. The Marquise remembered that in the book, those lands they were heading to were the main stage for all the big moves Christian and Julia made. One time, the Marquis invited her there for a date, and he helped a kid who was begging for change. Julia found out the kid was doing it because his parents were sick, so she decided to go and heal them. That's why the Marquise now understood. That place could be the minefield because of the princess's memories, and on top of that, she had to face those memories herself. But she was totally ready for that showdown. Then the Marquis suddenly remembered that his wife had already been here with William. Was kinda thinking the situation had to be super bad, but the girl jumped in real quick to shut that down and was all like, no, it's a totally awesome place, and said she just came to check out the vibe. The whole area was huge and stretched out along this massive river. Plus the whole trade scene here was super developed for real. Everything was just like the book described, and Hillary was remembering all over again how Julia had totally healed that kid's parents, while Christian was feeling kinda awkward and embarrassed that she'd seen a little kid begging for change on his turf and all. So then, Hillary repeated the exact words of the princess from the book, saying how you could just feel that the people there were living and working to the fullest. Christian was totally bugging, like he couldn't figure out how his wife could repeat word for word what Julia had said, like the exact same lines she dropped back in the day. The girl admitted she'd said it without even thinking. She was just so zoned into the moment that the words just kinda came out on their own. Now she was totally kicking herself over it, and had no clue how to play it off without him getting suspicious. Right at that moment, the carriage hit a bump, and the girl fell back onto the seat, though it's pretty likely she faked it just to distract the Marquis. She explained that even though she'd been riding in carriages for a while now, she could just never get used to how rough they were. Christian, seeing the state his wife was in, he was actually worried about her while she was totally watching how he was acting. So finally, Hillary tried to chill him out, telling him she was all good, but she could tell from his look that the Marquis wasn't buying it. He noticed her hair ribbon had come loose, and decided to help her out and fix it. The girl couldn't even believe that Christian would actually do something for her. And right then the carriage started shaking again. The Marquis totally lost his balance and almost fell right on top of Hillary, but he managed to grab the back of the seat just in time. The Marchioness kind of freaked out about the whole situation, and Christian immediately started apologizing for not keeping his balance, and he went to back away, but the bumps in the road just wouldn't quit. And he decided that for now it was safer for the Marquis to just stay put. He just really didn't want Hillary to fall off the seat and get hurt. Meanwhile, she was all curled up in a ball, but she soon noticed that his hair hanging over her was starting to tickle her skin a little. Her heart was beating so hard in that moment, she thought it was gonna straight up burst out of her chest. At that exact moment, Christian started wondering if the Marchioness could see this whole situation in her visions. The girl was clueless at first about what he was even saying, and the Marquis clarified he was talking about the whole situation, when he was with Julia. Hillary couldn't wrap her head around how her husband in a moment like this could still be thinking about that, but she confirmed she'd seen it just a super long time ago. Now Christian was starting to get why he felt like the Marquis knew the past way better than the future. She knew herself that if he was still dwelling on that, it meant he was still in a weak headspace, and she had to be extra careful with her words. Pretty soon the carriage stopped, and the driver knocked, asking if he could open the door since they'd arrived. The Marquise asked him to wait a minute, because she wanted to fix her dress. She hadn't even realized how fast they'd gotten there. When the driver opened the door, he said he was worried she hadn't gotten out sooner, but she felt perfectly fine. And the only thing she couldn't stop thinking about was the Marquis. After getting out of the carriage, she finally managed to distract herself when she saw what was in front of her. In the courtyard right in front of the building's entrance, there was this big table with benches, a place where you could just hang out outside for a while. The Marquis told his wife right away that it was a place for just chilling, and she could do whatever she wanted there. Then he gave her the tour of the inside and was like they had 20 workers totally ready to start right now. Plus, the transport situation at this spot was totally dialed in for moving all the materials and products around. On top of that, there was a huge warehouse for stashing all the goods, and the girl was kind of wondering why the place was still a total ghost town. Anyway, she was digging the vibe of the place and figured that popping off with mass production would be no big deal. The girl hadn't forgotten she was supposed to be looking out for the Marquis, and he in turn asked if she'd managed to round up all the soap makers. Hillary was feeling a little awk about having to admit that for real every single one of them had given it a hard pass. The soap around here was all made by hand, and to them it was basically like a work of art. Then the girl had a thought that maybe the workers were just not vibing with the idea of making that much soap all at once. Not even Jeremy, who was trying to help her out, could get the workers to even show up. The Marquis didn't recognize the name at first, and Hillary had to remind him that he was the tailor, you know, the one who hooked her up with the dress. Then Christiana got super nosy about how close she'd gotten with him, and said she could totally spill the tea. He figured this job should be a piece of cake considering their profession and mad skills. Like the craftspeople in this game should totally know their stuff. So the Marquis was like he didn't get why that dude was having such a hard time finding people for the soap factory. Then he decided that if the tailor couldn't pull it off, it was on him to meet up with them and have a chat. He promised his wifey he would round up the workers for that factory like ASAP, so she wouldn't have to stress. The girl was starting to get hyped again, even though she couldn't really wrap her head around why Cristian was handling her business. When it seemed to her that Hillary wasn't feeling his help, she was quick to push back, explaining that he'd already helped her a ton. She insisted again that the Marquis shouldn't be going so hard just because of her. And she didn't want to disturb his peace or anything. The Marquis added that he was also doing it for their lands, cause he suspected that the problems popped up once he started losing his grip on things. The girl thought it was super weird that a husband would help his wife out with that kind of stuff, and she felt totally awkward. Right at that moment, the coach drivers rolled up and just stood next to them, like they were waiting for Cristian to continue the convo. Asked what they were even doing there, and they told him some visitor had rolled up. The Marquis was kind of shook when he heard that. I mean, the factory had been totally dead for so long, and then out of nowhere, some rando shows up. While they were trying to break it down, he walked in. Just like that, this guy who went straight up to the Marquis, it was good old Carl, who was bugging cause he thought he didn't get there in time and hauled it over there when he heard the car. He was also super curious why the bosses were at a place this rundown and not back at the main house, and got all worried that something bad was going down. Then the driver, all hyped up, announced that the mayor of the area had just arrived. That guy's always so extra. The Marquis went straight over to talk to him, telling him he didn't have to rush over like that, but he just gave her a super respectful greeting. She didn't want Carl messing up his bad knees, but he insisted he was just worried about them. Cristian was watching the whole vibe between his wife and this guy, and it felt like she was way more chill with that guy than with him, but Hillary had gotten pretty close with the mayor, cause they were always swapping info news since they were both in charge of handling things on the inside, so finally Carl just asked what brought the big shots out to the old factory that's been dead for ages. Then Cristian. He explained they'd come over so she could scope out the spot he was planning to use. Hillary, though, was low-key thrilled that the Marquis called her his wife in front of everybody, and not just like wife, but his asterisk wife. And just like that, her thoughts got all twisted up again. Then she remembered that on paper they were for real married. And she'd called him husband to other people, so now Hillary was wondering if this meant she was finally getting some real cred. After he'd called her his asterisk wife and everything, without even realizing it, the girl started balling up her fists, totally hyped. Meanwhile, the Marquis was thinking she was scheming or something. Just then Carl rolled up and asked her to spill on what machinery she was planning to use. Up to this point, Hillary had been crushing it with all the behind-the-scenes stuff, and now the mayor wanted to help her out. The girl was super grateful to the old dude for putting in the work to prep the site, so they could get the factory up and running ASAP. She was also giving major props to the Marquis, cause she was finally getting some recognition for her hustle. Cristian calling her his asterisk wife again was also his way of showing he was impressed that she had handled all the business with his properties so well. Hillary was still having a hard time getting used to her new title, but low-key it was giving her actual life. The mayor even had to admit he was totally feeling the whole glow-up the Rivera had. The girl basically broke it down for the Marquis, saying that after last year's total train wreck, she decided to get some stuff fixed up. That was after she and William scoped the place out. And yeah, that was the same disaster that basically kicked off the whole Julia and John thing. And this land barely got touched, but the Rivera got hit the hardest for real, so they had to sink a wild amount of cash into fixing it. The mayor was seriously hyped that the Marquesa had just handled all that business. After that, they bounced to the residence where Carl suggested they peep the construction book and all the accounting files. The Marquis kinda clocked that. Hillary had pretty much been running the whole show, even though he totally figured William would be handling that stuff. Later, Cristian was thinking about how his wife totally nailed it. You know, thanks to him stepping in. But honestly, he kinda loved that she was bossing it up all on her own. The girl decided she wanted to take a look too, explaining she still hadn't gotten the final report on it. The Marquis was totally cool with it. I mean, she ran the whole thing, so he just passed her the book. Hillary started digging through the pages real carefully, and even Cristian was like, okay, something's up with the Marquesa. She just pointed out a few spots where the final cost was off from the first quote. But they weren't like a big deal. Her husband totally thought she had already handled that stuff, but Hillary was quick to say she had other things going on. Like she'd never tackled anything like this before. But the butler was a total lifesaver, helping her and the Marquis out big time. He kinda got the vibe that his wife already knew the deal with this kind of stuff. The girl just played it cool, saying she was a fast learner. Like super quick, cause she was the Marquise and had to know her stuff. Then she basically told the mayor to check up on the repaired embankments every year. Carl was a real one, super genuine. And he'd never cap just to get ahead. So you could totally count on him, no doubt. That kind of trust, though, you only get that with people who actually help, and Hillary was also a total natural at winning people over with her charm and skills. After that, the mayor suggested that the big shots go check out the Rivera, where they'd also evened out the levy. The girl was like, that's a brilliant idea, since that way she could compare the budget and make sure everything was legit. Plus, Hillary figured that was the spot where the Marquis and the princess probably used to take walks, and that would totally jog his memory. She was totally down to go check the whole place out. But she couldn't bring Cristian with her, so she decided to put it on the back burner for later. The second she said she wasn't going, the Marquis, right then, he was like, yeah, I'm totally down to go check it out. Cristian explained that he had to see it for himself, because it was basically the payoff for all his hard work. And he always thought the dam was a super aesthetic spot anyway, even before they fixed it up after the flood. The Marquis also figured it was a good time to make a public appearance as a married couple. So then Cristian just grabbed his wife's hand and was like, let's go right now together. No, waiting at first, the girl honestly thought she was dreaming. But ever since she got thrown into this whole situation, a whole 3 years had already gone by. She knew it wasn't a dream, but getting to stay as Hillary, that still felt like a total fantasy to her. Now she could actually just vibe in that dream, especially today when the whole thing felt straight out of a movie. Soon enough, they were heading out to see the dam, the rebuilt one, and other spots nearby. The girl realized she was walking right beside the Marquis while everyone else was keeping their distance. When she looked back, she saw the looks on all their friends' faces, which were basically saying that they got the hint and didn't want to crash their moment. She was also kind of shook that Cristian even agreed to come, and now he was walking and holding her hand. Her mind was just full of her BAE all over again. But then something else clicked: the dam. It was already here when she came to scope out the river before. Plus, the Marquise knew the view was totally fire, just like Cristian said it would be. She also kind of thought the Marquise was getting all up in her feels about this place. But she couldn't do a thing about it, just had to vibe and wait, just slowly walking next to him. Then out of nowhere, the Marquis decided to hit her with a question, asking if she knew he'd been here before with Julia Hillary. She was like a little shook, but she copped to it, not right away, but admitted she already knew. Cristian was like, guess I can't hide anything from you, but he wasn't even tripping about it. The girl was shook all over again, like even more this time, with no clue what her husband was going to say next. But then she just decided to tell him that if that's the case, he didn't have to pretend everything was cool. So then the Marquise went on about how Julia was such a genuinely good person, how she was always the main character lighting up the world around her. He remembered this one time they were by the river, and the princess had spotted something in the water and told him to come look. Cristian went over to check it out, but he didn't see Zip, and Julia was like, no, the sun is just hitting the water in this amazing way. The princess was totally obsessed with it, and she was also like dying for the Marquis to see how beautiful it was for himself. She was like totally glowing that day. Cristian was too shook to even get near her. When Hillary spilled that, she felt this like lump in her throat, and the Marquis was struggling to even swallow. He could tell the girl was getting super awkward with this whole convo, but the Marquis had to remind him that thanks to Julia, he had this unforgettable epic romance. So now she couldn't really get all weird about it, admitting that the princess was for real a good person. Hillary also pointed out that this world is blinding with how complicated and messy it is, and Julia always knew what was up. After hearing his wife out, the Marquis decided that in that case, maybe they were the ones staring way too hard at everything, but the young woman believed a simple life was enough, and Cristian's was pretty rough. 'Cause more than anything, he just wanted to be seen, but the person he loved just kept calling him out. That's why Hillary couldn't stand her, but that didn't mean she thought Cristian had to hate her too. You know, the Marquise was hoping it would just stay a good memory, and not leave any major scars while she was looking at her husband. Hillary suggested they try living a more chill life. She also figured the Marquis could get her out of all the hard, complicated stuff. Cristian, who was totally hanging on her every word. She actually thought it was low-key hilarious, but she was way too scared to actually tell him that. But then when she saw the look on his face, the girl could totally tell he thought it was funny, and she started blushing like crazy. Hillary even felt for a sec like she was dying of cringe over what she'd said, and she just wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Then she looked back at her husband's hair. It was longer than hers, and she just didn't get why. But like, whatever. Cristian was still her favorite person for real, and she was kinda sad that it wasn't real. Lost in her own world, Hillary ran her fingers through his hair and saw it was still all messy, which honestly made her a little bummed out. All of a sudden, the Marquis got closer and asked her if it was like too late now to say the stuff she had just said. The girl was totally confused. So the Marquis explained that she had pretty much already done everything for him. As Cristian gently fixed his wife's hair so she didn't look so much like a hot mess, he added that he was also super thankful for all the other things she does for him. And just like that, Hillary was totally frozen again. Like she couldn't say a word or even move after that. She noticed that while Christian was fixing her hair, he was leaning in, getting closer and closer. But then, like the very next second, she felt him tying a ribbon at the back of her neck so the wind wouldn't totally mess up her hair. Then the Marquis tweaked it a little to make it look cuter and was hoping she was into it. Hillary also noticed something extra was in her hair, and she reached up to feel what was up. She found one of her fave barrettes that was now clipped in her hair. The girl had totally spaced and forgot all about it, and she realized that the barrette had been with the Marquis ever since her carriage got rocked. Her whole train of thought got cut short again by Christian, who gave props for how the riverbank was looking legit restored, and the girl explained it was all cause the Marquis greenlit the budget for it right on time. But Christian just cut her off again, saying that no, he was the one who should be thanking her like big time. For a sec, the girl thought this could be the end of the whole novel, but she still couldn't just dip out of it. The story was playing out a little different now, and she had to figure out her whole purpose there. A purpose not just for her as a person, but for the main character Hillary, whose whole endgame was Christian. A little later, after they checked out the spot, the Marquis suggested to his wife that they should head home. For a minute, she was just walking in silence, because she was seriously grateful for her husband for like a million things. Especially today. The whole time she knew that besides her BAE, everyone else was just like background noise to her. A few days later after the Marquise checked out her lands, she got a pop-up visit from Madame Elizabeth. She straight up admitted that she knew Hillary had been out with her husband. She also fessed up that in the most exclusive circles, that's literally all anyone was talking about. So she obviously couldn't just ignore it. Hillary had been crazy busy with some new stuff, so she had to dip on a few classes. But she totally got that the rumors had spread like wildfire. And then it clicked that her teacher was really fishing for the deets on her so-called date. The girl cleared it up real quick, like it wasn't a date. It was literally just that. They went to scope out a workshop on her property. Then Elizabeth remembered that the Marquise had recently hit up Jeremy to get some soap makers together, and now she totally got why. She also mentioned they were pretty stubborn and super hard to get on board. And the Marquise confirmed that literally no one agreed. The tutor tried to offer her help, but Hillary just assured her it was all good and already handled. Hillary had to admit Christian was basically a magician. He managed to round up the artisans like crazy fast and get this 2 of them. Even decided to bring their apprentices for the future factory, so they could level up their skills there. The Marquis was also thinking that once the soap biz was up and running, they would totally need to hire people from the poorer neighborhoods and get them on the payroll. Plus, he was 100% sure that once the pros were finished nailing down the whole process, everything would be smooth sailing. The girl was so hyped that her husband could hook up the people who needed it most with jobs. Mrs. Elizabeth was totally shook when she saw that the Marquis had handled the problem so easily. Hillary confirmed that thanks to her man, the whole soap-making business was actually on the right track. Plus, she was so happy that even though she caused all that drama at tea with the princess, the lady had still sent her a letter spilling the tea about the temple. The girl was totally vibing with how Elizabeth made sure there was no bad blood or any awkwardness towards the Marquise. With all that going on, Hillary realized that the lady's whole situation with Julia had completely changed, and decided to find out what was up. Then she thanked the tutor for the letter and was like, my bad, for not having had the time to send a thank you note back. But Elizabeth wasn't even tripping about it. She wasn't expecting a reply anyway, and the Marchioness wanted to know what the lady had been up to then. She confessed that the whole reason for her visit was the Crown Prince's wife. Hillary immediately thought something major must have gone down and got ready to listen up for real. The lady decided to spill this tea only with the Marchioness, and added that the princess still hadn't gotten used to the whole imperial family vibe. The girl knew that Elizabeth wouldn't just say something like that for no reason, and started asking her for more deets. Then the tutor also revealed that word on the street is Mrs. Marion had decided to bounce from the imperial palace. Hillary couldn't believe that that woman, who was basically the guardian of the palace, would decide to just ditch her own home. Elizabeth added, though, that at that moment, the emperor and the crown prince shut her down immediately. But she's still dead set on it. Was also kind of thinking that the cause could be her age and maybe getting sick. But she was scared it was probably the princess's fault. Then Hillary remembered that at tea you couldn't even feel Marion's influence, and figured she had already decided to bounce. Elizabeth also pointed out that it was no coincidence, and remembered how the Marchioness had been so brave talking to Julia. The lady suspected that Marion just couldn't put up with the crown prince's wife anymore, especially at her age. The Marchioness thought that Lady Marion's role was now more important than ever, and she had to ask the princess to get her act together, and be way more careful. Elizabeth confessed that ever since she found out she's been a total wreck and can't calm down now. Hillary got that her tutor had totally given up on Julia, and then out of nowhere decided to ask the Marchioness for a favor. The girl didn't get why the lady, who had literally just bailed on Julia herself, was now asking her for a favor. Elizabeth admitted that she wanted to get away from her highness, but to do that she needed the Marchioness's help. The lady was hoping she could talk to the princess and somehow influence her on it. Hillary was totally shook by a request like that, but the lady was sure it would all work out, since she had already pulled off so much stuff. However, the girl explained to her tutor, she wasn't sure she could even talk to the wife of the crown prince about this whole thing. She was positive the princess was totally ghosting her after the tea party drama, But still, Elizabeth insisted that one mess-up didn't mean the Marchioness couldn't still, care about her. The lady was also totally sure that only Hillary could get through to Her Highness. Plus, she's literally the only one who keeps it real with her. Not even knowing what to say, the girl asked for a few minutes to think it over. 'Cause this wasn't a small ask. Lately, Julia had been getting super intense and was taking everything way too personally and getting all emotional. Lady Elizabeth remembered she tried to talk to the princess about Marion, but she wouldn't even hear the tutor out. She also got that if Her Highness kept acting like that, she'd lose all her clout like ASAP. She was also hoping the Marchioness didn't actually hate the princess, and that the whole tea party incident was just to get Julia and Cristian to make up, Hillary had already earned Her Highness's trust for real. She even became her right-hand girl, and now Julia needed her more than ever. The Marchioness was also kind of wondering if the lady would have asked her for something this big if she didn't know. About that whole scene at the snack party. This whole ask also meant that Hillary was gonna have to take charge all on her own. Take the lead and own whatever happened. On the flip side, the girl knew that Julia was in such a bad state now, that she wasn't even listening to Miss Elizabeth. Plus the Marquise got that based on what the princess did. She now had beef with John too. The Crown Prince still hadn't hit up Hillary, which meant he didn't even know yet that his wife was about to lose her divine powers. So the Marquise admitted to Miss Elizabeth that she just couldn't turn down such a desperate plea. But in return, the girl asked that at some point the tutor would owe her a favor. TBH, the Marquise had zero plans on helping Julia out, not even if her own life was on the line. Meanwhile, back at the palace, the prince was walking through the garden, thinking about why Miss Marion had decided to bounce. He'd known that woman since he was a kid, and how she basically took care of him instead of his own mom. Marion was always super loyal to the imperial family, and she was always proud of her work. For real, the Crown Prince never saw that woman as just a servant. But as part of the fam, so he decided to drop by recently to try and talk her out of it. When John showed up, she was already holding her suitcase again, but he was dead set on talking to her. But Madame Marion was sure His Highness would totally become a righteous ruler, and that God would have his back, no help from her needed. So the prince guessed it was because of Julia, but Madame kept insisting she was just tired. Marion refused to spill or even admit that the real reason she was leaving was the princess. To Julia, old school ladies were like a symbol of being extra, so she threw a tea party to spill her thoughts. But since the princess was the top dog in the imperial fam, Marion couldn't let her get disrespected like that. So she got all flustered and just stopped handling her main duties at the imperial palace. The prince was still convinced Julia was the reason she was dipping, and he knew everyone else got it too. He noticed his wife had changed, and wasn't even taking care of the garden where she used to hang out. Before, the princess would always say she felt so chill looking at pretty flowers, and she'd even tell her husband he should try to find some calm by looking at them. The prince started wondering what to do if the flowers weren't cutting it, and Julia was trying to come up with another plan. And just then, as he was thinking about it, he totally thought he heard the princess calling his name. He whipped around in like a second, 'cause the voice sounded super low-key and sweet. But his wife wasn't even there in front of him. Instead, it was the Marquise. She was just standing there trying to get his attention. When she saw His Highness wasn't reacting right away, the Marquise even thought something might have happened to him. The prince couldn't just tell this girl that he was just totally overwhelmed by everything, and was basically daydreaming about the princess. Still, the way he looked kind of freaked Hillary out. She was trying to figure out what was up, but she was drawing the total blank. John was shook when he realized the Marquise had shown up at a really bad time, and that right then he literally didn't want to see anyone but Julia. He also thought he might be losing his mind since he for real thought it was the princess who'd called him. Anyway, he figured out that Hillary wasn't there to see his wife, and got curious about why she was looking for him instead. The girl, after getting the request from Madame Elizabeth, wasn't planning on meeting up with the princess in person. Hillary was planning to play it a different way, and in fact, she'd come to talk straight to John. She wasn't even expecting to bump into him in the garden on the way to his office. Seeing him all spaced out like that, the Marquise could totally tell from his face that something was up. But she was still trying to figure out if he was bugging about it. If it was over Madame Marion, or if the Emperor's health was tanking. The prince himself, though, actually thought it was a good thing the Marquise had stopped by, since he'd been meaning to talk to her and Larry anyway. She thought for a sec that Julia must have spilled all the tea to her husband about the whole drama with her sacred power. But instead of that, John wanted to know if it was for real that the Marquis had decided to dip out and go check on his properties. The girl was super thrown by that question, because she was not expecting that at all and had a totally different vibe. The Marquise, though, explained to the prince that she had her own business to handle there too, so they just decided to roll out together. Then the prince asked how the Marquis was holding up, figuring he was probably feeling better by now. Hillary explained that they'd brought a doctor with them, and the prince got the hint that Cristian's situation still wasn't great, which the Marquise thought was hella weird. 'Cause before, when the prince was all wrapped up with Julia, he couldn't have cared less about his well-being. But all of a sudden, now that he was solo, he decides to act all concerned about his health and pretend to care. On one thing, though, Hillary was 100% sure, after seeing the prince's reaction, Julia was keeping her prediction about the girl completely on the down low. She was even kinda curious how much longer the princess would keep that secret, but now standing in front of the prince, the Marchioness kicked things off by thanking him for worrying about her hubby. Then she spilled that he wasn't looking like his usual self that day, like he seemed super stressed. Then she added that it was obvious because John was so worried about His Majesty the Emperor. She also admitted she'd heard from his wife that the whole prophecy about the Emperor finally came true, and the princess immediately used her sacred power, but the prince still looked all pale and anxious. The Marchioness also threw in that she knew the outcome before anyone else, so John didn't need to hide anything from her. The prince explained that the Emperor was kind of struggling to move even after getting a power-up from Julia. The young woman, with total concern in her voice, claimed she knew His Highness hadn't fully recovered yet. This totally got to him, and he was bugging, wondering how the Marchioness knew. Then Hillary faked being scared and loudly suggested that the princess hadn't told him anything yet. John couldn't figure out what the Marchioness was getting at or why his wife was even in the mix, but Hillary just declared that her prophecy had come true and that she wouldn't bother him anymore. That totally ticked off the prince, because he thought the Marchioness had decided to ghost on her duties to him. As Hillary was dipping out, she just explained that the princess would spill everything to him soon enough, but that was low-key freaking her out. She also added that Julia was obviously having beef with Mrs. Marion again, even though they both tried to get her to chill, and maybe the princess was already getting sus. Now it was impossible to figure out who was the real shot caller in the palace. The prince got even more heated and demanded the Marquise just drop the whole conversation. But before she bounced, she threw shade about all of John's massive screw-ups, talking about the Emperor Avi, whose sickness was totally incurable, his whole secret thing going on with Julia, and the whole power-ranking shakeup in the palace. But she was hoping the prince, being so smart and all, would have picked up what she was putting down. John got that the Marquise was basically calling out the princess on her every move, and figured he could just blow her off this time. At the same time, though, she was super meticulous, and John knew that Hillary wouldn't have spilled all that tea for no reason. The prince started getting all in his head, paranoid about what his wife was hiding, and was too scared to come clean about this whole time. She just kept acting like everything was cool and was still smiling at him. A little bit later, John went to go check on the princess, and she was all smiles, acting like she didn't have a single secret. Julia had just made some tea and right away offered her hubby a cup. The prince wasn't feeling the tea, though, and he fessed up that he came with a super important ask. She could totally tell he was in a bad mood, but John didn't even hesitate and asked his wife to use her divine power to heal his dad one more time. When he said that, the princess literally almost dropped the teapot because she knew how badly this could end. But then she decided to get a grip, and so she wouldn't blow her cover. She just burst out laughing, adding that he had totally freaked her out. Then Julia promised that she would help the Emperor and that she'd swing by around noon to see him. The prince thought he'd been tripping for no reason and said sorry to Julia for bugging her. Then he wondered if he was asking for way too much since she was already using her powers on the Emperor morning and night. The princess saw he was bummed out and calmed him down, telling him not to even sweat it, because she hadn't lost any of her juice. She also told her husband not to doubt her divine power or her skills, not even for a sec. Then, all sweet about it, she took her husband's hands and promised him that His Majesty would be okay. The Emperor was gonna bounce back real soon. The prince thought that was low-key sus, the way the princess was so dead set on everything being totally fine. He was literally about to press her for more deets, but their whole conversation got cut off by a random knock on the door. Then the maid popped in and announced that the first priests, the ones the princess was waiting on, had already shown up and were waiting for her in the Julia room. She saw this as a perfect excuse to dodge the awkward chat, and she dipped out to go meet them. The princess just told her husband that she had a meeting with these guys and asked if they could catch up later. The second they got in the hall, the crown prince's wife started booking it toward the meeting like she was super late or something. The maid totally clocked it and couldn't figure out why her boss was in such a mad dash, like someone was literally on her tail. At the same time, the princess was trying to figure out why her husband had decided to bring up her strength out of nowhere. It was something he'd never ever questioned before. For a hot second, she got paranoid that he already knew about the whole messed up prophecy. She was terrified the Marquise had spilled everything to him. She even considered turning back and just being straight up with the prince, but something held her back. Julia was like, nah, it's not over yet, because her divine power hadn't completely ghosted on her. She decided she'd spill everything to the prince. Once that power was completely MIA, she was basically betting the prophecy was a total bust. I mean, either way, everyone was gonna find out when her divine power just poofed, which was something she couldn't hide, Avi. Meanwhile, John was deep in his feels again, thinking about how everyone he trusted was straight up ditching him. On top of that, his dad's health was taking a nosedive, and his so-called dear wife was acting super sus, and all this drama was pointing straight back to Hillary. But he couldn't figure out how she was even mixed up in it back then. He decided it was his mess to deal with, and that he just couldn't see the full picture before. Back when things got super tense and suffocating, Cristian was always there for him, being a real one. This totally sent the prince down memory lane, and he decided he had to link up with the Marquis. A little while later, the Marchioness finally got a call from the Countess Pamela asking to meet up. She spilled in a letter to the Marchioness that after that little get-together, she ended up being the only married noble there. All thanks to her also, because she was friends with Julia. The high society crew was showering her with gifts, showering her highness with gifts and other perks, And Laurie was vibing, thinking everything was going way better than expected, even though the Countess was writing that her highness was like super hard to get to know. It was the same deal with Madame Marian, and it got even more real after she heard the tea. About what went down with Elizabeth in the letter, the Countess hit up Hilary asking for her take on what else to do in a sitch like this. Pamela also had no clue that Madame Elizabeth was the one in charge of schooling the Marquise. So that's why she decided that keeping in touch and staying tight with her would be a total power move. Before Hilary was really hoping the Countess would get way closer to the princess than Elizabeth did, but since that wasn't happening, she just had to switch up her game plan. So the Marquise wrote back that she totally got what she was stressing about and advised her to just replace the young ladies in her highness's squad. Hilary figured that for recruiting new rich girls, the Countess would be way more effective than her since she's a total normie. The girl also mentioned that in that new crew, there'd be some who just couldn't compete with the stubbornness and super strict vibe from Julia than Pamela could figure out on her own what to focus on and how to play her cards. While she was getting this letter ready, the Marquise also started thinking that the Prince John was being mad quiet, which was sus. The girl was low-key, wondering if he'd actually talked to his wife, and like if they had sorted out that whole misunderstanding. But whatever you know, John probably would have hit up the Marquise right then, even though she totally didn't want to see either of them. Now she was just hoping everything would go according to her master plan. So she started picturing how it could all go down. A few days later, she was already posted up with the prince and her husband, who were giving each other a major death stare, like they were in some kind of silent flex-off. This whole meetup happened at some hush-hush imperial palace, which was basically the prince's secret crash pad. For real though, the Marquise had no idea why the get-together was even scheduled at that spot of all places. But the bottom line was they were all together now, stuck under the same roof with Cristian and John. After some super awkward silence, the Marquis suggested he and the prince should dip for a bit and have a private chat. The girl had no clue what they were plotting, but she was stressing about her husband and told him to hit her up if anything went down. The prince clapped back that anyone would think he was about to eat the Marquis alive or something if they heard that. But Hilary wasn't even shocked, TBH, because she remembered crystal clear how things ended the last time they talked one-on-one. He was also kind of bugged and worried over the fact that John had just hit up the Marquis all of a sudden. A couple of days ago, Cristian went over to his wife and admitted that he'd gotten an order from John, and that now he had to go meet up with him. The Marquis couldn't just ghost him since it was like an official command from the Crown Prince. Hilary didn't get why it was a whole command, though. Then she figured he was probably afraid the Marquis would turn him down if Cristian just decided to bail on the meeting. He was curious what his wife's take on it was, since she'd just been hanging with the prince recently. She just explained that from her point of view, the prince was totally wiped, and maybe that's why he wanted to meet. She also let him know that even with John's clout, the Emperor's whole situation hadn't actually gotten any better. She connected that whole thing to Lady Marian's straight up dipping from the Imperial Palace, but like just to herself. She remembered the prince got super touchy when they talked about the whole issue with Julia's sacred power. It also sketched her out that at their last meeting, the Marquis totally couldn't keep his cool, and now he didn't want to meet up either. It was also really ticking off the Marquis that when his wife was going through it, the prince was a total no-show, and now he's ordering him around. Cristian could tell his wife was getting heated, but he also noticed that for some reason he'd chill out. But the Marquis totally vibed with how Hilary only ever called the prince by his title, and never his actual name. And then the Marchioness announced that she wanted to crash that meeting with her husband too. Cristian agreed to let his wife and the doctor tag along, but like strictly for health reasons. Before the trip, the Marchioness had no clue the meetup spot would be that secret love nest villa, but it made her realize that the prince decided to meet up with Cristian without telling the princess. And now, as the two guys went off to talk, Dr. Mark was trying to calm the Marchioness down, telling her that her hubby was doing just fine. It had been a hot minute since the conversation started, and the girl was still on edge. The doctor peeped her state, and figured he'd have to give her Cristian's meds. But then the Marquis popped up behind her, and Mark immediately asked how he was doing. And as for Hilary, she jumped up right away, totally freaked that something had happened to her man during their chat, or that the prince had messed him up or something. As she got closer, the girl noticed he was looking crazy pale, which was a total red flag. Right after the Marquis, the Crown Prince walked back into the room with a whole vibe on his face. Kinda ticked off, but John didn't say a peep. He called for his servant, and let him know it was time to bounce back to the palace. The doc went over to Cristian and offered him the medicine that usually helped him out. But the Marquis just smacked the medicine aside and turned to his wife, looking like he was about to put her on blast. Hilary could see the Marquis was acting totally sus, and she tried to guess what they had been talking about. Then Cristian asked why she had asked the prince to give them the lands in Attica in exchange for some prediction. The girl went ghost white when she heard him mention it, but she couldn't tell her husband it wasn't true. And besides, Cristian had already found out from the prince that Hilary had asked for her husband to get the title of duke. The Marquise saw her husband was totally buggin', but she was already planning on telling him herself. She had just picked a better time to do it. Now Cristian was looming over her like she was some kid who'd messed up. And he'd concluded that she herself was just thirsty to get the title of Duchess. He even started thinking that his wife might be connected somehow to Countess Caroline, the Count's daughter. The girl didn't know what to say, and that nasty lump was stuck in her throat again. totally shutting him down so he couldn't say a thing. During the talk, they had just a sec before the prince basically admitted he was the one who made the call. Because he figured the Marquis wouldn't want to link up with him, then he told Cristian he was sorry for real, making it clear that's not how you treat your friends. And he owned up to it. But by then the Marquis was like, whatever. He didn't even care, and just wanted to know the real reason why John had him show up. He was also keeping it super formal since he only came because he was ordered to, and like it was the right thing to do. John started off by saying that Cristian had always been his ride or die, the one dude he could trust with anything, no questions asked. Now he was starting to get it. That even though the Marquis had been keeping his distance, he really didn't have anyone else he could trust anymore. Cristian realized his wife was totally on the money, and the prince was looking seriously wiped out, even though it was kinda awkward hearing that from an old friend. Then he laid it out for John, saying that trusting someone or not had to be his own call to make. The prince knew his friend had a point, but he was iffy on whether he could even trust Julia now. Cristian saw that His Majesty was just quiet, totally lost in thought, and figured he was probably done asking him stuff, so he tried to hurry up and bounce, since his wife was waiting for him outside, and the prince was actually surprised that the Marquis just called her Hillary, and his wife too. John peeped that his old homie was like totally trusting this girl, even though he knew she had asked for something in return for the prediction. Then he spilled that the Marchioness's ask was pretty wild, and he was also like wondering if Cristian could even trust her after that. The Marquis had no clue what the prince was getting at, so he broke down all the conditions that Hillary had demanded. After hearing that, Cristian basically decided his wife was super greedy and just after the money. At the same time, he remembered how she was always insisting that she wasn't interested in his stuff at all, cause she wasn't some kind of scammer, and now he just felt totally played, cause he knew the prince wouldn't lie to him about something that major. So Cristian got this idea that his wife might be connected to the Duchess, in some shady way. Right then the girl saw his whole expression just drop, and she knew it was all her fault. She went ghost white too, and started totally freaking out on herself inside her head, while the Marquis was trying to figure out what her deal was. Meanwhile, the doctor, seeing that Cristian wasn't actually in any danger, Hillary decided to wait outside so they could talk things out. She knew she'd literally die if the Marquis got the wrong idea about her, and she started racking her brain on how to fix this whole misunderstanding. Like ASAP. She straight up said she had zero connection to the dead Duchess, and she reminded him that she'd already told him the prince and princess wanted to apologize to Cristian and felt super bad for how they treated him. That's literally the only reason why Hillary decided to go after the Attica lands, and she swore she wasn't being shady or anything. For a sec, the Marquis was just silent, just trying to process what his wife was saying, and those few seconds felt like a total eternity to her. Then he finally asked on what grounds he should believe her, cause without an oath anyone could just say that stuff. The girl suddenly remembered right then and there that in the OG novel, there was something mentioned about making a vow. So she decided to swear an oath to her husband, grabbing his hands, cause she was being 100% for real. Hillary wanted the Marquis to be like the main pillar, the absolute MVP in this empire, and for his life to be totally epic. The girl tried to explain that this country would literally never recover without him, and that she was totally down to set everything up for that to happen. On top of that, she was basically begging him to just accept what she was saying, and she wouldn't let go of his hand until he did. Then Hillary looked her husband in the eyes, all hopeful, just wishing that her words would actually help and that he'd stop being so ticked off at her. But the Marquis just kinda suggested she should head home. And at the same time, he just dropped her hand. In that moment, Hillary didn't just feel awful. She literally wished the ground would just open up and swallow her, seeing that things had gotten that bad. Cristian, for his part, had already bounced from the room, and out in the hall the doctor was there to meet him, who was wondering why he was flying solo. But the Marquis didn't answer him and just kept walking while Mark noticed his face was getting super red. That's when Cristian remembered the convo he had with the prince, about trust and how it was on him and only him to decide whether to trust someone or not. Now the Marquis found himself in a pretty similar jam, still not having a clue what call to make. When Hillary got back to the house, she was even scared the Marquis was gonna kick her out of his place. But he didn't. But then again, he also straight up stopped talking to her, which made her feel super down. It was only through the butler that she could get any deets on how the Marquis was doing, who would report back on the boss's vibe, just waiting every day for her husband to kick her to the curb. Hillary was still totally hoping to see him at least one last time. The soap samples that showed up a little while after kinda helped her chill out from being so sad. The girl totally saw this as a real opportunity to talk to the Marquis, and she headed straight for his office. But she was still too chicken to actually knock on the door. But then she totally hyped herself up. She raised her fist up to the door and had the soap samples ready to go over with him. Besides, Hillary didn't forget that first off she had to get a read on his whole vibe and how he was feeling. Just as the girl was getting ready to knock, the door swung open and the Marquis, looking totally shocked to see his wife, appeared right in front of her. Hillary just froze up again, completely forgetting everything she wanted to say the second she saw the face of the guy she was crushing on, who she hadn't seen in forever. The Marquis asked why she was just standing there in front of his door. And the first thing that popped into her head was asking him to go for a walk. But Cristian was on his way to the library to grab a book and said he'd only be down for a walk if it was through the hall. Then the girl remembered the samples and decided to show them to the Marquis. While she was trying to catch her breath, Her husband agreed, and pretty quickly noticed that the samples had been whipped up pretty fast while chatting about the Hillary soap. She noticed he wasn't in a funk anymore, and was actually not avoiding her. So the girl figured that for real, he might just be super zoned in on reading just like he was always telling her. Deep down in her heart, the Marquise started to hope that Cristian had finally decided to trust her after that whole mess. And she was also praying he'd just forget about that whole moment when he kissed her hand as a sign he was sorry. The Marquis was still just looking over the samples the craftsman had whipped up in a bunch of different types. And he noticed one had no smell, another was harder. There was a soft, colorful one too. The Marquis figured the soft soap would run out way too fast, so it was better to use the hard kind and just add a little scent. He also figured that the regular people who look up to the nobles would want their soap to be the exact same shape as theirs. Listening to her husband, the young woman was genuinely stoked about his whole thought process and thought he was crazy smart. Then Hilary got ready to shoot a message back to the craftsman, even though she couldn't stop crushing on her husband. Meanwhile, the Marquis wondered if everything was cool with his wife since he himself had been swamped with books and trying to get his thoughts straight. Decided to start spilling the tea about some rumors that the local makers were starting to whip up soap for personal hygiene. Cristian was like, the regular folks are gonna have a super hard time getting used to that because they've literally never used it. And Laurie was totally on board, saying that if the soap was cheap, it would just end up collecting dust in people's houses for no reason. So to fix this whole mess, the girl had a total light bulb moment, and she immediately ran it by her husband. Later she linked up with Helen and Paul, who were the biggest theater stars in the capital, and also not gonna lie, total hotties. They were super talented and even wrote all their own plays, and right then they were just chilling at the Marquise's place. She knew that in this world people totally believed getting sick was some kind of punishment, and even soap wasn't gonna change their vibe. So that's why Hilary schemed up a way to get sales to blow up for the soap they were making. She pitched hitting up Helen and Paul to create a whole ad campaign with their help. To pull it off, she was thinking about sponsoring plays and shows, back in her real world. Because with these actors performing, Hilary could basically make a huge ad showing how to use this soap. But instead of just sponsoring, she suggested working the product placement right into the play itself. The Marquise was really hoping the actors, they'd be the trendsetters getting everyone to use the soap. Paul was totally zoning out after listening to Hilary. He just couldn't get on board with a sponsorship with all those strings attached. He laid it out that the play for all the locals was already written and locked in, totally rehearsed and scheduled. He thought it was kind of sketchy to just cram new stuff in at the end and change up the whole script. And even though the cast would be totally hyped to get support from the Marquis this time, there was just no way to switch things up Hilary. Hilary felt kind of bad about it too, for just dropping the proposal on them so last minute. And the Marchioness told them to just hit her up later with an answer. She handed them a contract and told them to actually read it, for real, and really think over her whole deal. For a hot minute she just chilled while the cast looked over the papers, but they were still convinced that nothing was going to change. So rewind a bit. When the Marchioness was explaining the whole scheme to her husband, he was totally into the idea of using the play's sponsorship as an ad. He wanted to show everyone how to use it, so it would blow up and become part of their whole lifestyle and actually be cool. He even said that's basically how trends get started with food, clothes, and all that other stuff. Cristian was totally into the idea. He was on board with his wife's plan and gave her the cash for the sponsorship. The girl then remembered she didn't even know how much it was going to cost. The whole ad game in this world is kind of wild. And she was low-key stressing that the cash the Marquise dropped wasn't even going to be enough. I mean, she got that the price for ads is all over the place depending on a bunch of stuff, but still. Now she was face-to-face with actors whose rep was legit the best in the entire empire. And so when Helen and Paul were scoping out the contract, the actress, not even thinking twice, just borrowed a pen from her dude. Then she went ahead and signed it too, real quick on the docs, and gave a shout-out to the Marquise. Hilary was so hyped she actually got them on board, while the Marquis, on the other hand, was thinking he probably should have offered more money. And when he threw in some extra cash, the actors were suddenly super committed to hyping up the soap, with some serious energy. As for the Marquise, she was stuck dealing with some major tension, handling business and going over the script for the play. The girl was just thankful that with her schedule being so slammed, she didn't have classes with Mrs. Elizabeth yet, or any big deal social events. But thinking about events and stuff got the Marquise curious about how the Countess was doing. With winning over those young ladies in the princess's crew, she figured she should probably meet up with her, but at the same time, she remembered it was about time for John to hit her up too. And right after Hilary had that thought, the prince actually invited her over. The girl didn't waste a second. She got ready real quick and bounced over to his palace. Right off the bat, he told her to have a seat without even bothering to say hey. Hilary was also kind of wondering if his whole vibe had switched up after seeing Cristian. But John kicked it off by admitting that he totally didn't believe her before, mostly cause of her beef with Julia. And plus, he remembered Hilary was openly throwing shade at him too. But even so, the prince admitted her predictions were totally on point. And plus, they were crazy important for the Empire's future. The girl was all ears listening to him, but she still couldn't really get what he was trying to say. So then the Crown Prince kept going, saying that even though he was super skeptical of Hilary, she made them face the fact that they needed her skills. At the same time, the Marchioness noticed that usually his voice was full of snark, but today he sounded legit worried. And not just worried either. The prince sounded totally defeated and helpless and even a little bit humbled. Then, John kept going, saying that even though he didn't fully trust her, that was the exact reason he made her his assistant. And in a talk they had recently, the prince was like rethinking the whole situation and decided to just be straight up with her. So when he walked up to the Marchioness, John told her she needed to spill the tea like everything she'd said to his wife. He said it again, but then added that since he was her boss and the prince the heir to this whole empire, he was legit ordering her to do it. The Marchioness couldn't believe someone so clued in, still had no idea that Julia was struggling with her powers. Hillary couldn't just blow off a direct order from the prince, but she also remembered her promise to the princess, so she admitted that she'd passed on a major prophecy. But Her Highness told her to keep it on the down low. And now the girl was realizing that Julia hadn't told her own husband about this. John was getting super curious if this prophecy had something to do with the emperor's condition. But the Marchioness was totally honest and confessed that her vision was that Julia's power was going to completely fade within the next 2 years. Hearing a prediction like that, the prince was completely shook, because he had also been putting some major hope into his wife's powers. Hillary, for her part, was remembering from the OG book that the princess got her power when she was just a kid from praying to the gods. Julia just saw how much all the poor people were suffering, like especially the kids, and he was desperate to help them out somehow. The Marquis basically explained to the prince that it was a gift, handed down straight from the gods, and that the rest was totally up to divine will or whatever. But still, what the Marquis said didn't exactly chill John out, since he was still stressing about the Emperor's health at the same time. He remembered that before everything the Marquis had ever said had been 100% on the money, and now she was curious to see what his next move would be like. What was the plan? John had no clue what to do now, so all he could do was wait it out. Plus, he'd be able to see just how legit that prediction about Julia really was. So the prince asked what was going to happen with Hillary's own powers, and she admitted that her own strength would probably fade away someday too. But the whole time, the girl couldn't forget that unlike the princess, she didn't have some special gift. She had simply become a regressor. But as they were wrapping up their chat, the prince told the Marquise that any new vision she had to report to him first, no exceptions. After that, the girl bounced and went back to her mansion. So like when the sun was starting to set a little bit later, they both get this letter handed to them. And the butler, when he dropped it off, mentioned it was from the actors. At first, Cristian was thinking there was some kind of issue, and he started reading the letter like super carefully. But nah, it was the total opposite, since they were just giving major props to their sponsors. 'Cause it was all thanks to them.